Hello guys, welcome to Muse Fanfiction. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry rescued a Goblin King at age 5 and was granted absolute control over every wizard's gold? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The debt beneath the stones. The cupboard smelled like dust and old shoes and the sharp chemical tang of the cleaning supplies Aunt Petunia kept on the shelf above his head. Harry Potter lay on his side on a thin mattress, knees drawn up to his chest, and listened to the Dursleys eating dinner. He could hear everything through the door. The scrape of forks on plates. Dudley complaining that the pork chops were too dry. Uncle Vernon grunting in agreement. Aunt Petunia's quick, nervous voice promising pudding, treacle tart, Dudley's favorite. She'd made 2 of them just in case one wasn't enough. Harry's stomach made a sound like a small animal dying. He pressed his hands against it and breathed through his nose. 2 days since Vernon had locked the cupboard. 2 days since Harry had done the thing he couldn't explain, the thing where the dishes had floated out of the sink and stacked themselves neatly on the counter while he was washing up, because his arms were tired and the water was too hot and he just wished they'd do it themselves. Petunia had screamed. Vernon had gone the color of raw beef. Dudley had laughed until he realized his parents were genuinely frightened, and then he'd started crying, which made everything worse. 2 days. No food. Water from the little bottle he kept hidden under the mattress for nights like these, but that had gone empty sometime that morning. Harry wasn't crying. He was 5 years old and he'd already learned that crying accomplished exactly nothing in this house. It didn't make the lock click open. It didn't make food appear. It didn't make anyone come to the door and say they were sorry, that they loved him, that everything would be all right. So he didn't cry. He planned. The lock on the cupboard was old. He'd been studying it for months, as much as a 5-year-old could study anything, watching Vernon's thick fingers turn the little latch each night. It was just a sliding bolt. Nothing special. And last week, he'd found that if he pressed his fingers against the gap at the bottom of the door and pushed with that strange warm thing inside his chest, the thing that made dishes float and made his hair grow back overnight and once made his teacher's wig turn blue, the bolt would shiver. He waited until the dinner sounds faded into the television, some program Vernon liked about cars or money or both, and then he pressed his small hand flat against the door. Move, he thought. Not angrily. Not desperately. Just clearly, the way you tell your own fingers to open and close. The bolt slid back with a soft click. Harry held his breath. The television blared on. Nobody had heard. He eased the cupboard door open an inch, then 2, then enough to slip his skinny body through the gap. The hallway was dark. Blue light flickered from the living room where all 3 Dursleys sat in a row on the sofa, their backs to him, their faces bathed in the glow of the screen. Harry moved through the kitchen like a ghost. He'd done this before, not the lock part, that was new, but the creeping, the careful placing of bare feet to avoid the squeaky floorboard by the refrigerator. He took a bread roll from the basket on the counter. Just one. If he took more, Petunia would count and know. He shoved it down the front of his oversized t-shirt, one of Dudley's cast-offs that hung to his knees. He should have gone back to the cupboard. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing, and Harry was already smart enough to know the difference between safe and brave. But his body ached from 2 days curled in the dark, and the kitchen window was open because Petunia always left it open after cooking to clear the smell, and the night air drifting in smelled like grass and freedom and something else, something strange and electric that made the warm thing in his chest pulse like a second heartbeat. Harry climbed onto the counter, slipped through the window, and dropped into the garden. The night was cool for September. He stood on the lawn in his bare feet, the grass damp with dew, and looked up at a sky smeared with clouds and the faint orange glow of suburban light pollution. Number 4, Privet Drive sat behind him, solid and square and humming with the trapped misery of his entire life. He started walking. He didn't have a destination. 5-year-olds don't run away to anywhere specific, they run away from. He cut through the back garden, squeezed through the gap in the fence he'd discovered last summer, and followed the alley that ran behind the row of houses. His feet slapped softly on cold concrete. The bread roll bumped against his stomach with each step. He walked for a long time. Past the end of Privet Drive, past Wisteria Walk, past the little park where Dudley and his friends liked to push smaller children off the swings. The houses thinned. A main road appeared, cars hissing past in the dark, their headlights sweeping over him like searchlights. He stuck to the shadows without thinking about it, the way small hunted things always do. Later, he wouldn't be able to explain how he ended up where he ended up. The warm thing in his chest had started pulling, gently at first, then with a steady insistence, like a hand wrapped around his ribs, tugging him forward and to the left and down a side street he'd never seen before. The street led to another street that led to a narrow lane that shouldn't have existed between a chip shop and a boarded-up laundrette, and the lane led somewhere that didn't belong in Little Whinging at all. It was an alley. Barely wider than Harry's arm span. The walls on either side were ancient brick, slick with moisture that glinted in the faint light. The ground was cobblestone, uneven and cracked, and growing in those cracks were tiny luminous mushrooms that gave off a faint blue-white glow, just enough to see by. Harry should have been terrified. He was 5, alone in the dark, in a place that felt like it had been cut out of the normal world and pasted somewhere wrong. But the warm thing in his chest was humming now, a low vibration that traveled up through his bones, and it said go forward with such certainty that he obeyed. He found the goblin 20 steps in. At first he thought it was a pile of rubble. The brick wall on the right side had partially collapsed, not old decay but fresh destruction. Dust still hung in the air, fine and chalky, and scorch marks blackened the bricks in patterns that looked almost like handprints. Something had happened here. Something violent. Then the rubble moved. A hand emerged from beneath a slab of masonry. Not a human hand. It was too long, the fingers too thin, the nails too sharp, dark nails, almost black, curved like tiny hooks. The skin was the color of old leather, and it was slick with something darker. Blood, Harry realized. He knew what blood looked like. He'd cleaned enough of his own off Dudley's fists. The hand clawed at the cobblestones, found no purchase, and fell still. Harry stood very quiet for a moment. The warm thing in his chest had gone absolutely silent, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what he would do. He knelt down. "Hello," he whispered. A sound came from under the rubble. A groan, low and rattling, followed by words in a language Harry didn't know, harsh, guttural syllables that sounded like stones grinding together. "I can't understand you," Harry said. "But I'm going to try to move the rocks, all right?" He started digging. The slab was heavy. Far too heavy for a 5-year-old, and Harry's arms were thinner than they should have been, and his hands were small and his fingers kept slipping on the dusty brick. He pulled at the edges. He pushed. He braced his bare feet against the cobblestones and shoved with his whole body, accomplishing nothing. The hand moved again. The fingers curled weakly, and this time the voice spoke in English, broken, rasping, but English. "Leave me, child." "No," said Harry. He put both hands on the slab and pushed and wished, the way he'd wished the dishes clean and the cupboard open, and the warm thing in his chest erupted. The slab lifted. Not by much, 6 inches, maybe 8, but it was enough. It hung in the air, trembling, while Harry grabbed the creature's arm and pulled with everything he had. The body came free in a scraping rush of dust and gravel, and Harry fell backward with the weight of it on top of him, and the slab crashed back down hard enough to crack the cobblestones beneath it. They lay there in a heap, both breathing hard. Harry's hands were scraped raw. His back ached where he'd hit the ground. But he was alive, and the creature was alive, and that was something. He wriggled out from underneath and looked at what he'd rescued. It was small, taller than Harry, but not by much, and roughly humanoid, with a large head and long pointed ears that lay flat against its skull. Its face was all sharp angles and deep lines, a face that looked like it had been carved from dark wood by someone who valued function over beauty. Its eyes were closed. It wore clothes that might once have been fine, a long coat of some dark fabric with metallic threads woven through it, now torn and soaked with blood. One of its legs bent at an angle that made Harry's stomach flip. "You're hurt," Harry said, which was obvious, but he was 5. The creature's eyes opened. They were black, not dark brown, not deep gray, but the absolute light-eating black of a cave with no torches. They fixed on Harry with an intensity that should have sent him running. "What, are you?" the creature rasped. "I'm Harry." "That is not what I asked." Harry considered this. "I'm a boy," he offered. "I live on Privet Drive." "Well. In a cupboard on Privet Drive." Those black eyes studied him. Something moved behind them, calculation, maybe, or confusion, or both. "You are a wizard." "I'm 5, Harry said, as though this was a counterargument. "I can feel it." The creature lifted one trembling hand and pressed its fingers to Harry's chest, right over the spot where the warm thing lived. Bright. Very bright. And something else. Something, the hand jerked back. The black eyes went wide. "The scar. Show me your forehead." Harry pushed his fringe aside. The lightning bolt scar was livid in the blue mushroom light. The creature stared at it for a long time. Then it made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't come out as a wet, rattling cough. "Harry Potter," it said. "Of course. Of course it would be you. You know me. Every goblin alive knows you, child. You are the boy who broke the Dark Lord." Another cough, worse this time. Dark blood flecked the creature's lips. "And now you are here. In an alley that exists between worlds. Pulling a dying king from the rubble." Harry sat cross-legged on the cold cobblestones and pulled the bread roll from his shirt. He broke it in half, carefully, evenly, the way he always divided things when he was sharing with himself between meals, half now and half for later. He held one half out to the goblin. "You should eat," he said. "I don't have anything else, but you can have half." The creature, the goblin, stared at the bread. Its black eyes went liquid and strange. One of those long-fingered hands reached out, trembling, and took it. "Do you know," the goblin said quietly, "how many centuries it has been since anyone offered me food?" "That's really sad," Harry said, and meant it completely. "Yes." The goblin looked at the bread in its hand. "It is." It took a small bite, chewed slowly, and winced at whatever internal damage the chewing aggravated. "My name is Ragnuk. I am, the king of the goblin nation. The true king, though my people have not acknowledged me for 300 years. Why not? Because wizards found it more convenient to deal with goblins who would cooperate. Who would bow? Who would manage their gold and forge their trinkets and accept the laws written to keep us small?" Ragnuk's voice was gaining strength, though his body clearly was not. The words came faster, driven by something that burned behind those black eyes. "They orchestrated a coup. Installed puppet leaders. Drove me into hiding. And tonight, when I emerged to reclaim what is mine, they were waiting." Who was waiting? Aurors. Ministry wizards. They have always had watchers in the spaces between, the alleys that connect your world to ours. Ragnuk coughed again. This time the blood was brighter. "They used killing curses. I deflected 3. The 4th brought the wall down." Harry didn't know what Aurors or ministry wizards or killing curses were, but he understood the shape of the story. Someone powerful had hurt someone smaller. He understood that perfectly. "Can I help?" he asked. "I can do things sometimes. Make things move. Fix things. You cannot fix this, Harry Potter." Ragnuk's voice was gentle in a way that seemed unfamiliar to his face, like the muscles had forgotten how. "I am old. Older than your ministry, older than your school on the hill, older than the bank that bears my people's shame. This body has held on for a very long time, and tonight it has decided to stop. But, listen to me. Ragnar gripped Harry's hand. The goblin's fingers were cold and trembling, but the grip was iron. I am dying. Nothing will change that. But I have lived long enough to know that nothing happens without reason in the deep magic, and the deep magic brought you to me tonight. A child. A wizard child who crawled from a cupboard with a stolen roll of bread and shared it with a Goblin King. Harry's eyes were burning. He blinked hard. I don't want you to die. I just found you. I know. Ragnar pulled Harry closer. The goblin's breath was fading, each exhale shallower than the last. And that is why I am going to give you something. A gift, and a burden, and a weapon. The only thing I have left that matters. He pressed his free hand flat against the cobblestones. The blue mushrooms pulsed. The air in the alley thickened, grew warm, began to hum with a vibration that Harry felt in his teeth. I invoke, Ragnar said, and his voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a wounded creature in an alley but something vast, something that echoed without walls to echo off of, the debt of gold. I invoke it by blood and by stone and by the fire that forged the first coin from the first vein of or beneath the first mountain. I invoke it as king, last and true, with my dying breath and my full will. The cobblestones were glowing. Not the mushrooms, the stones themselves, and the brick walls, and the air between them. Gold light, warm and rich, pouring upward from the ground like dawn breaking beneath the earth. I name this child. Ragnar's black eyes were blazing now, lit from within by that same gold. Harry James Potter. I name him Gold Tongue. I name him Keeper of the Hoard, Master of the Minted, Lord of every coin that bears a goblin's touch. The light hit Harry like a wave. It poured into him through his skin, through his eyes, through the scar on his forehead, and the warm thing in his chest that had been his companion for as long as he could remember roared in answer. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He felt everything. Every coin. Not just nearby, not just in London, but everywhere. Thousands of them, millions, an ocean of gold and silver and bronze spreading out in every direction like a web that covered the whole world. He felt vaults, vast underground chambers packed with treasure, stacked and sorted and sleeping in the dark. He felt the coins moving through hands, clinking into pouches, sliding across counters. He felt them breathing, each one stamped with goblin craft, each one carrying a tiny sliver of goblin magic that now answered to him the way his own fingers answered to his thoughts. And beneath it all, deeper than the vaults, deeper than the bedrock, he felt the mountain. Not a physical mountain but a truth, an ancient agreement written into the fabric of magic itself, that goblins are the keepers of wealth, and the king of goblins commands that wealth absolutely, and now the king's power lived in the blood of a 5-year-old boy kneeling in an alley with scraped hands and no shoes. The light faded. The humming stopped. The alley was dark again except for the gentle glow of the mushrooms. Ragnar smiled. It was the first time his face had done that in a very long time, and it transformed him, not into something beautiful, exactly, but into something true. There, he whispered. It's done. I feel. Harry couldn't find words big enough. Everything. You feel the gold. You will always feel it now. It is yours, not to own, but to command. Every galleon, every sickle, every canute. Every vault in Gringotts. Every goblin-forged blade and cup and crown. They will answer to your voice and your will for as long as you live. I don't understand. You will. Ragnar's grip on Harry's hand was weakening. His eyes were dimming, the gold light behind them fading to embers. The goblins will come. They will feel the transfer. They will be angry, confused, afraid. Do not let them bully you, Harry Potter. You are their king now, in the only way that matters. I don't want to be a king. I just wanted to help you. I know, Ragnar said again, and his smile deepened, and the last of the gold light left his eyes. That is precisely why you should be one. His hand went slack. His chest rose once more, fell, and did not rise again. Harry sat beside the body of the Goblin King in a glowing alley that shouldn't exist, holding a dead creature's hand, and cried. Not the quiet, swallowed tears he'd learned at the Dursleys. Real crying, loud and ugly and wrenching, the kind of crying you do when you've lost something precious that you only had for 10 minutes. He was still crying when they came. The sound arrived first, a sharp crack, like a whip, repeated a dozen times in rapid succession. Then figures poured into the alley from both ends, short and long-fingered and furious, dressed in armor that gleamed dully in the mushroom light. Goblins. 20 of them at least, carrying weapons that Harry's new sense told him were very old and very dangerous, each one forged by masters whose names he somehow knew without ever learning them. They stopped when they saw him. A goblin at the front of the group, shorter than the others, leaner, with a face like a hatchet and eyes like chips of obsidian, stepped forward. He wore a dark suit rather than armor, and his teeth were very sharp and very visible because his lips were pulled back in something that was not a smile. What, he said, in a voice like a razor drawn across glass, have you done? Harry looked up, tears still wet on his face. He died. I tried to help him but he died. The goblin's eyes moved from Harry to the body on the ground. Something passed across that sharp face, recognition, shock, a flash of something that might have been grief, and was gone. Ragnarok, the goblin breathed. Then, louder, to the others, it's Ragnarok. The Pretender King. He wasn't pretending, Harry said. He didn't know why he was so sure, but the gold sense pulsing through him confirmed it with absolute certainty. Ragnarok had been real. The truest thing in this alley. The lead goblin's gaze snapped back to Harry. Those obsidian eyes narrowed. I can feel it. Every goblin in Britain can feel it, a shift, a transfer, the old magic moving. That's why we came. He took another step forward. The debt of gold. He passed you the debt of gold. He gave me a gift, Harry said. Because I helped him. A gift. The goblin's voice could have etched steel. A 5-year-old human child is sitting in an alley at, he glanced at the sky, half past midnight, and the most ancient compact in goblin history has been transferred to him, and he calls it a gift. What's your name? Harry asked. The goblin blinked. Whatever he'd expected the boy to say, it wasn't that. Griphook. Griphook. He was hurt and alone and I helped him and he wanted to give me something in return. That's what happened. I don't know what all of it means yet, but I know it's real because I can feel every piece of gold in, Harry paused, overwhelmed by the scope, everywhere. I can feel gold everywhere. Silence. The armed goblins shifted. Griphook stared at Harry with an expression that cycled through disbelief, fury, calculation, and something that, in a less guarded face, might have been awe. You need to come with us, Griphook said finally. Are you going to hurt me? We are physically incapable of hurting you. The debt of gold makes you sovereign over every goblin who has ever struck a coin. To raise a hand against you would be to defy the deepest magic our race possesses. Griphook's mouth twisted around these words like they tasted of vinegar. You are, for all practical purposes, our master. I don't want to be anyone's master, Harry said quietly. I've been on the other end of that. It's not nice. Something flickered in Griphook's eyes. Nevertheless. You need to come with us. There are things you must understand, and this alley is not safe. The same ministry forces that did, he gestured at the rubble, at Ragnarok's body, will have felt the transfer as well. Harry looked down at Ragnarok. What about him? Griphook hesitated. Then he said, in a different voice, lower, rougher, stripped of its razor edge, we will take him home. He will be buried beneath the mountain, as a king should be. Whatever else he was, whatever the politics of it, the debt has confirmed his claim. He was our king. A pause. You need to let go of his hand. Harry hadn't realized he was still holding it. He let go gently, carefully, and laid Ragnar's hand across the dead goblin's chest. "Thank you," he whispered to the body. "For the bread and for the gift and for talking to me. Nobody ever really talks to me." Two goblins came forward and lifted Ragnar's body with a tenderness that surprised everyone, including themselves. Griphook watched, jaw tight, then turned to Harry and held out a hand. "Come, then, Gold Tongue. Let us see what you've inherited." Harry took the goblin's hand. It was the second hand he'd held that night, one dead, one living, and both felt more real than anything on Privet Drive ever had. They vanished from the alley with a crack. Gringotts' wizarding bank at 1 a.m. was a different creature than the one Wizard saw during business hours. The marble halls were empty of customers but not of life. Goblins moved through corridors and down staircases that seemed to descend forever, going about the work that never stopped, counting, weighing, verifying, protecting. The sound of it was like a heartbeat, constant, rhythmic, the pulse of an economy that never slept. Harry felt all of it. Walking through the front doors of Gringotts was like stepping into the center of his own nervous system. Every surface sang to him. The marble floors had veins of goblin-smelted minerals running through them. The chandeliers overhead were forged by goblin smiths whose techniques were older than the building itself. The counters where tellers sat during the day were inlaid with metals that hummed at frequencies only he could hear. And the vaults. God, the vaults. They stretched below him like a vast underground constellation, each one a point of light in his awareness. He could feel them individually, the small ones near the surface with their modest stacks of coins, and the deep ones, the ancient ones, where fortunes accumulated over centuries sat in darkness so complete it had weight. He could feel what was in them. Not details, not documents or personal effects, but the gold, the silver, the artifacts. Every goblin-touched object in every vault was a candle flame in his mind, and together they blazed. "You feel it," Griphook said, watching Harry's face. They were walking through a corridor deep beneath the bank's public floors. "All of it." "It's loud," Harry said. "It will quiet. You'll learn to adjust the volume, so to speak." "How do you know that?" "I don't. No human has ever carried the debt of gold. I am guessing, based on how our own kings describe their connection to the Horde." Griphook's jaw tightened. "This is unprecedented. You understand that? In the entire history of our race, and our race is old, child, older than wands, older than your ministry, older than the Roman wizards who thought they ruled the world, no non-goblin has ever been granted sovereignty over goblin gold. Ragnar chose to. Ragnar was a dying exile who hadn't spoken to another goblin in 3 centuries. His judgment is, shall we say, open to question. He was kind," Harry said. "He was hurt and scared and dying and he was still kind to me." Griphook stopped walking. They were standing in a wide underground chamber lit by torches that burned without smoke. The walls were rough-hewn stone, and carved into them were faces, goblin faces, hundreds of them, each one distinct, each one staring down with those same bottomless black eyes. "This is the Hall of Kings," Griphook said. "Every ruler of the goblin nation is recorded here. The last face carved was Ragnar's, 312 years ago." He turned to look at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be hostility and not quite managing it. "There will need to be a council. The elders will want to challenge the debt, find a way to revoke it, transfer it to a goblin. I am telling you this honestly because the alternative is lying to you, and the debt makes that inadvisable. What happens if they challenge it? They will fail. The debt of gold is absolute. It cannot be revoked, transferred, or modified by anyone other than the one who holds it. That is its nature. It was designed as a failsafe, a way for a dying king to ensure his successor's authority was unquestionable." Griphook's lip curled. Ragnar knew exactly what he was doing. "So why tell me about the council?" "Because you should know that you will walk into a room full of very old, very powerful goblins who will despise you on principle, and you will need to not flinch. Harry thought about Uncle Vernon's purple face 2 inches from his own. About Dudley's fists. About the cupboard door closing and the lock clicking and the dark settling in like a blanket made of nothing. "I don't flinch," he said. Griphook studied him for a long moment. Then something changed in the goblin's expression, not softening, exactly, because Griphook's face didn't seem built for softness, but a slight easing of the sharpest edges. "No," Griphook said. "I don't imagine you do." The council happened 3 hours later, in a chamber so deep beneath London that Harry could feel the Thames flowing above them as a distant, muffled pressure. 40 goblins sat in a horseshoe of stone seats, all of them old, all of them armored, all of them looking at Harry the way cats look at something that's wandered into their territory uninvited. Harry sat in a stone chair at the center of the horseshoe. It was too big for him. His feet didn't touch the ground. He'd been given food, real food, roasted meat and dense bread and a drink that tasted like honey and metal, and his scrapes had been treated with a salve that tingled and smelled like hot iron. He was clean and fed and exhausted and more awake than he'd ever been in his life. Griphook stood beside him. Not quite behind him and not quite in front, beside him, which Harry understood instinctively was a statement, though he wasn't sure what kind. The eldest goblin spoke first. Her name was Bogrod, and she was so old that her skin had gone from leather dark to a dusty gray, and her eyes had faded from black to a cloudy white. She was blind, but she turned her head toward Harry with unerring precision. "I feel it in you," she said. Her voice was like wine through a mine shaft. The crown fire. Ragnar's last breath, burning in a human shell. "Yes, Elder," Griphook said. "The boy does not speak for himself." "I do," Harry said. "I'm Harry. I'm sorry about all of this. I know you didn't ask for it and neither did I, but Ragnar said the deep magic brought me to him, and I believe him." "You believe a king you knew for 10 minutes. He didn't lie to me. I can tell." And he could, the gold sense carried with it something like a truth weight, a way of feeling the shape of honest words versus hollow ones. It was new and strange and he trusted it completely. He was real. He was the realest person I've ever met. Bogrod made a sound in her throat. "The dead is authentic. This is not in question. What is in question is what we do about it." "Nothing," said another elder, a broad-shouldered goblin with ritual scars on his cheeks. "The debt is the debt. It cannot be broken. It was not meant for humans. It was not meant to be limited," the scarred goblin shot back. "That is its entire purpose." Ragnar invoked it in full knowledge of what he was doing. He was the king. The magic accepted his choice. "We are bound." The argument went on. Harry listened. He didn't understand all of it. The goblins kept referencing treaties and precedents and ancient grudges that meant nothing to a 5-year-old, but he understood the emotional shape of it. They were afraid. Not of him specifically, but of what he represented, a fundamental shift in the power dynamic between goblins and wizards that could go very, very badly. After an hour, Harry said, "Can I talk?" The chamber went silent. "I don't want to take anything from you," Harry said. "I don't even really understand what I have. But I know what it feels like when someone bigger than you makes all the decisions about your life and never asks what you want. That's been my whole life. I won't do that to you." "Pretty words," said an elder from the far end of the horseshoe. "Wizards have always had pretty words for us. I'm 5. I don't know any pretty words. I'm just telling you what's true." "And what, Gold Tongue, do you intend to do with the power you hold?" Harry thought about this with the serious, furrowed brow intensity that only very young children bring to very large questions. "I'd like to not go back to the cupboard," he said. "And I'd like to learn about all of this, about goblins and magic and what Ragnar wanted for you. And when I'm old enough to understand things properly, I'd like to try to make things better." But right now I'm very tired and I'd like somewhere to sleep that isn't under a staircase. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. Less hostile. More considering. Bogrod spoke. The boy will stay. Griphook, you are assigned as his liaison. Elder, you stood beside him. That was your choice. Now it is your duty. Griphook's jaw worked. Harry looked up at him. Is that okay? He asked. I don't want anyone to have to be with me if they don't want to. Griphook looked down at the small, battered, impossible boy sitting in a king's chair with his feet dangling above the floor, and let out a breath through his sharp teeth. It's fine, he said. Someone needs to keep you alive long enough to be useful. Harry smiled. It was the first real smile he'd worn in a long time, and it transformed his thin face the way sunlight transforms a room. Thank you, he said. Thank you all. He fell asleep in the chair before anyone could respond. Griphook caught him before he slid off and carried him, awkwardly, muttering in gobbledygook about absurd humans and undignified assignments, to a chamber that had been hastily prepared with blankets and cushions and a fire that burned low and warm. He set the boy down, pulled a blanket over him, and stood there for a moment looking at the lightning scar half hidden by messy black hair. What have you done to us, Ragnuk? He murmured to the empty room. The gold in the walls hummed softly in response, and Griphook chose to believe it was the ventilation. 6 years passed. Harry Potter grew up in 2 worlds. The Goblin world, underground and ancient and fierce, where he learned to read the language of gold and understand the treaties that bound magical races together, where he trained his body in goblin combat forms that were brutal and efficient and had been developed by creatures who'd spent millennia fighting things bigger than themselves. And the human world above, where Griphook insisted he maintain a presence because, as the goblin put it, vanishing entirely will attract the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of wizards. The Dursleys were handled. Not cruelly, Harry wouldn't allow cruelty, but firmly. Griphook appeared at number 4, Privet Drive on a Tuesday morning while Vernon was at work and Dudley was at school, and had a conversation with Petunia Dursley that lasted exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. What was said in those 4 minutes and 30 seconds was never fully disclosed, but when Harry returned to the house that evening, his cupboard door had been removed from its hinges, a proper bedroom had been prepared for him upstairs, and Petunia's face had the frozen, glassy look of someone who had been confronted with the precise monetary value of every piece of property and financial asset her family possessed, and been told in very specific terms what would happen to those assets if her nephew was mistreated again. Harry still didn't like the Dursleys. But they fed him properly and left him alone, and he came and went as he pleased through means they couldn't understand and didn't dare question. At 7, he sat in on his first Gringotts board meeting and asked a question about interest rates that made 3 senior account managers choke on their tea. At 8, he detected a discrepancy in the Potter family vault. Someone had been siphoning funds for years, rerouting them through shell accounts to finance operations that had nothing to do with the Potter estate. He traced the withdrawals to an authorization signed by one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, acting as magical guardian. The funds had been directed to something called the Order of the Phoenix. Harry filed this information away, said nothing, and quietly closed the leak. At 9, he forged his first piece of metal under the guidance of a goblin smith named Cragner, who'd expected the human child to burn his hands and cry and had instead watched, open-mouthed, as the gold sense guided Harry's hammer with a precision that took goblin apprentices decades to develop. The result was a ring, simple, unadorned, warm to the touch, that Harry wore on a chain around his neck and never took off. At 10, the Ministry of Magic made its first attempt to establish contact. A witch named Mafalda Hopkirk arrived at Gringotts with a scroll of parchment and a nervous smile and a request for a brief meeting with the young man who had come to the attention of the improper use of magic office. She was politely received, offered tea, and informed by Griphook that Harry Potter was a sovereign entity under Goblin law and that the Ministry's jurisdiction over him was, in the politest possible terms, non-existent. Hopkirk left looking like she'd swallowed a lemon. 3 days later, a longer scroll arrived from the office of the Minister for Magic himself. Harry read it, recognized it for the blend of threats and flattery that it was, and replied with a single line, "I look forward to meeting the minister at a time of mutual convenience. Sincerely, Harry Potter, Gold Tongue." The minister did not write back. And at 11, on a morning in late July, an owl arrived at number 4, Privet Drive carrying a letter written in emerald ink on heavy parchment. Harry was eating breakfast in the kitchen. The Dursleys were on holiday in Majorca. They went every year now, and always for the entire summer, which suited everyone. Griphook sat across the table, reading the Financial Goblin and eating a raw steak with the fastidious precision of a surgeon. The owl landed on the windowsill. Harry opened the window, untied the letter, and read it while the owl helped itself to his toast. "Hogwarts," he said. "Obviously," Griphook said without looking up. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Thrilling. There's a supply list. Robes, wand, cauldron, books. All available in Diagon Alley. Which you've visited approximately 40 times. Harry set the letter down and looked at Griphook. "Dumbledore runs that school." "He does. The man who was spending my parents' money without my permission." "The very same. The man who left me with the Dursleys and never once checked to see if I was all right." "That would be him, yes." Harry picked up a piece of toast and ate it thoughtfully. "I want to go." Griphook set down his newspaper. "Explain." "Ragnuk told me about Voldemort." "You've told me about Voldemort. The prophecy, the scar, all of it. Dumbledore knows more than anyone about what happened to my parents and what might be coming. I won't get that knowledge sitting in a vault." Harry took another bite. "Besides, I want to learn wand magic. Goblin craft is brilliant, but it's not everything. You will be surrounded by wizard children who know nothing about you, taught by professors with their own agendas, in a castle that is effectively Dumbledore's fortress. You understand the tactical position you'd be placing yourself in." "I understand it perfectly. I also understand that I control the gold that pays every professor's salary, funds the school's operations, and sits in the personal vaults of every pure-blood family that sends their children there." Harry smiled. "I won't be defenseless." Griphook studied him. The boy had changed in 6 years, still thin, still small for his age, but with a wiry strength and a steadiness in those green eyes that made people forget he was 11. He wore simple clothes, dark and well-made, and the ring on the chain around his neck caught the light when he moved. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a kid eating breakfast. But Griphook had watched him stare down a room of armed goblin elders at the age of 5 without blinking, and he knew better. "I will accompany you to Diagon Alley," Griphook said. "I'd like that. I will not accompany you to Hogwarts. Goblins are not permitted on the grounds without ministry authorization." "We'll see about that." "Harry." "Griphook." They looked at each other across the table, the goblin and the boy, 6 years of history and argument and grudging affection compressed into a single glance. "Don't do anything stupid," Griphook said. "Define stupid." "Anything I wouldn't do." "That's a very short list. You once threatened to collapse the entire Malfoy vault because a teller used the wrong honorific. And the teller never made that mistake again. Finish your breakfast. We leave in an hour." Diagon Alley on a late July morning was a riot of color and noise and barely contained magic. Witches and wizards streamed in and out of shops, owls circled overhead, and the cobblestone street hummed with the particular energy of a place where the impossible was for sale in every window. Harry walked through it all with Griphook at his side and felt the gold. It was everywhere. In the tills of every shop, in the pouches on every belt, in the vaults far beneath their feet where Gringotts burrowed into the London bedrock. Every transaction, every coin changing hands, every galleon earned and spent, he felt it the way a spider feels its web, each vibration carrying information. People stared. Not because they recognized him, his scar was hidden beneath his fringe, and he was dressed simply enough to be any young wizard on his school shopping trip. They stared because of Griphook. Goblins didn't walk through Diagon Alley. Goblins stayed in Gringotts, behind their counters, in their proper place. A goblin walking freely beside a human child, armed with the short-bladed sword that all goblin warriors carried, was wrong in a way that made people uncomfortable without quite knowing why. Harry noticed the stares. He catalogued them, the nervousness, the distaste, the reflexive way some wizards moved to the other side of the street. He said nothing. He filed it away in the same place he kept the Dursleys' cruelty and Dumbledore's unauthorized withdrawals and every other injustice he'd observed in 11 years of living between worlds. "Wand first," Griphook said. "Wand first," Harry agreed. Ollivander's was narrow and dusty and packed floor to ceiling with thin boxes that Harry's gold sense told him contained metal and wood and something else, something that wasn't quite goblin-made but wasn't entirely foreign either. The shop hummed. Mr. Ollivander appeared from behind a shelf like a ghost materializing from a wall. He was tall and thin and his pale eyes had that same unsettling focus that Ragnar's had, the look of someone who saw more than the surface of things. "Ah," he said. "Harry Potter. I've been expecting you." "Most people have, apparently," Harry said. Ollivander's eyes flicked to Griphook. Something moved across his face, surprise, interest, caution. "And you've brought a friend." "Liaison," Griphook corrected. "Quite." Ollivander's gaze returned to Harry, and now those pale eyes narrowed. "You're different. I've fitted thousands of wizards and witches for wands, Mr. Potter, and I can tell within moments what sort of core and wood will sing for them. But you." He tilted his head. "You're carrying something else. Something very old." "I am," Harry said. "Will that be a problem?" "A problem?" "No." "A fascination?" "Absolutely." Ollivander vanished behind the shelves. Boxes began to float off the stacks, drifting toward the counter. Let's see." 12 wands later, the shop was in mild disarray. The first 3 had done nothing at all. The 4th had set a shelf on fire. The 7th had levitated every box in the shop simultaneously. The 10th had shattered its own handle. Ollivander was delighted. "Extraordinary. The goblin magic in your blood is interfering with the standard resonance patterns. The wand wants to bond, but the gold sense keeps, here." He placed a box on the counter with unusual care. "Try this one. Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather core." Harry picked up the wand. The shop went silent. Not quiet, silent, the way a room goes silent when all the air has been sucked out of it. The wand was warm in his hand, and the warmth spread up his arm and met the gold sense in his chest and the two forces circled each other like wary animals and then, with a rush that made Harry's hair stand on end, merged. Gold and red sparks erupted from the tip, not the usual gentle shower but a torrent, a fountain, a bonfire of light that illuminated every corner of the shop and made the dust motes dance like stars. Ollivander let out a breath. "Oh my! Oh my! What?" Harry said. "The phoenix whose feather resides in that wand gave another feather. Just one other. And that feather," Ollivander's voice dropped. "The brother wand belongs to the wizard who gave you that scar, Mr. Potter." The shop was very quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Harry looked at the wand in his hand. It felt right. It felt like a key fitting into a lock he hadn't known existed. "Good," he said. Ollivander blinked. "Good. If I'm going to face him someday, and I probably am, I'd like our wands to know each other." He paid for the wand, 7 galleons that he pulled from a pouch at his belt, each coin humming with recognition as it passed from his hand to Ollivander's. The wand maker stared at the gold as though he could hear the humming too. The rest of the shopping took 2 hours. Robes from Madame Malkin's, where a pale blonde boy was already being fitted and shot Harry looks that were half curious and half superior. Books from Flourish and Blots. A cauldron, scales, files. An owl, A snowy white female with amber eyes who landed on Harry's shoulder unprompted and refused to move, which the shop owner said she'd never done before. "You collect loyalty the way other people collect chocolate frog cards," Griphook observed as they walked toward Gringotts. The owl, Harry had already named her Hedwig, rode his shoulder like she'd been there her whole life. "I don't try to. I know. That's what makes it so annoying." They climbed the white marble steps of Gringotts, and the great bronze doors swung open before Harry touched them. The goblins at the entrance bowed, not the shallow, perfunctory nod they gave to wizard customers, but a deep inclination of the head, fist pressed to chest. Inside, the tellers stopped working. Every goblin in the hall turned to look at Harry. The silence spread like a wave, broken only by the distant rumble of cart tracks far below. Harry walked through the hall toward the head goblin's office. He didn't rush. He didn't strut. He walked the way someone walks through their own home, easily, naturally, with the unconscious confidence of absolute belonging. A wizard at one of the counters, portly, middle-aged, wearing the purple robes of a ministry official, watched Harry pass with mounting confusion. "Excuse me," he said to no one in particular, "why are all the goblins bowing to that child?" No one answered him. Harry reached the far end of the hall and stopped. He turned to look back at the vast marble space, the chandeliers, the gold-inlaid counters, the hundreds of goblins who watched him with expressions ranging from reverence to resentment to guarded hope. 6 years ago, he'd been a starving boy in a cupboard. Tonight, he'd be a student on a train. But right now, standing in the heart of the goblin world with gold singing in his blood and a wand, how more actions continue. Chapter 2, the weight of every vault. Platform 9 3/4 smelled like coal smoke and anxiety. Parents clustered in tight knots along the platform, fussing over trunks and owls and last-minute reminders about clean socks and proper behavior. The Hogwarts Express sat gleaming in its bay, scarlet and massive, venting steam in lazy plumes that curled around the wrought iron pillars and drifted up toward the glass ceiling. Harry stepped through the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 without breaking stride. He'd known about the entrance for years. Griphook had shown him at age 7, along with a dozen other hidden passages between the wizarding and muggle worlds, but he'd never had reason to use it until now. The transition was seamless, a membrane of magic that parted around him like water. He carried his own trunk. He'd refused the levitation charm Griphook had offered, not out of stubbornness but because he wanted to arrive at Hogwarts looking exactly like what he appeared to be, an 11-year-old boy, unremarkable, carrying his own luggage. The element of surprise was a weapon Griphook had taught him to value, and arriving with fanfare would squander it. Hedwig sat on top of the trunk in her cage, watching the chaos of the platform with amber-eyed disdain. Harry found a compartment near the back of the train, empty, quiet, away from the clusters of returning students who shouted greetings to each other through open windows. He stowed his trunk overhead, let Hedwig out of her cage to perch on the luggage rack, and sat by the window to watch the platform. He could feel the gold. Not just here, everywhere, as always, but here it was concentrated, dense, a constellation of personal wealth moving through a confined space. Coin purses, goblin-forged watch chains, inherited jewelry, the galleons sewn into robe linings by cautious parents. Every family that sent a child to Hogwarts carried a piece of the goblin economy with them, and every piece answered to Harry. He turned the awareness down, the way Griphook had taught him, like adjusting the volume on a wireless, letting the constant hum fade to background static. It had taken 2 years to master that control. The first months after receiving the debt had been overwhelming, a ceaseless roar of information that gave him nosebleeds and kept him awake for days. Griphook had sat with him through the worst of it, feeding him information about what he was feeling, helping him build the mental architecture to contain it. The memories surfaced unbidden, Griphook's voice in the dark of the chamber beneath Gringotts, clipped and impatient, saying, "You are not drowning. You are the ocean. Act like it." It had been terrible advice delivered in the worst possible way, and it had worked immediately. The compartment door slid open. A boy stood in the doorway, tall for 11, thin, with red hair and freckles and a smudge of dirt on his nose. He wore second-hand robes and carried a battered trunk that looked like it had been through at least 3 older siblings. On his shoulder sat a fat gray rat that was either asleep or dead. "Anyone sitting here?" the boy asked. "Everywhere else is full." "Go ahead," Harry said. The boy wrestled his trunk into the compartment with the graceless energy of someone who'd never been taught how to pack efficiently. He collapsed into the seat across from Harry, blew a strand of red hair out of his eyes, and grinned. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron's eyebrows shot up. His eyes flicked to Harry's forehead, then away, then back, then away again with the visible effort of someone trying not to stare. "You're, really? Blimey. I mean, sorry, that's probably annoying, people going, blimey, at you all the time. You're actually the first. Most people I spend time with aren't easily impressed." Ron laughed, startled and genuine. "Yeah. Who do you spend time with, then?" "Goblins, mostly." Ron's face went through an interesting series of expressions. "Goblins? Like, Gringotts goblins? Is there another kind?" "Well, no, why do you spend time with goblins?" Harry considered how much to say. He'd thought about this on the walk to King's Cross, how to handle the first interactions, what to reveal, what to hold back. Griphook's counsel had been characteristically blunt: tell the truth. Lies require maintenance. The truth requires only that people be brave enough to accept it. "It's a long story," Harry said. "Short version, a Goblin King gave me some things when I was 5, and I've been learning from goblins ever since." Ron blinked. "A Goblin King gave you things?" "Yes." "What kind of things?" "Everything, essentially." The train lurched into motion. Ron grabbed the seat to steady himself, and the rat on his shoulder woke up with a squeak. The platform slid away, parents waving, younger siblings running alongside the train until it outpaced them, and then they were cutting through London, the city falling away on either side as the express picked up speed. Ron was still processing. Harry could see the gears turning behind those blue eyes, and he liked the kid for the simple reason that Ron didn't try to pretend he understood things he didn't. His face was an open book: confusion, curiosity, a flash of something that might have been envy but passed quickly. "My family's not exactly rich," Ron said abruptly. "I've got 5 older brothers and a younger sister, and my dad works at the Ministry. Department of Misuse of Muggle Artifacts. The pay's rubbish." He said it quickly, defensively, the way you rip off a bandage. "So when you say, everything, I'm just trying to figure out what that means." "It means I know exactly how much is in your family vault at Gringotts," Harry said, and held Ron's gaze steadily. "It means I could tell you the serial number of every galleon your mum sent with you for the train trolley. And it means absolutely none of that matters to me, because money's just metal with a spell on it, and the fact that you walked in here, saw a stranger, and introduced yourself without checking my net worth first makes you more interesting than anyone I've met in 6 years." Ron stared at him. The rat squeaked again. "That's the weirdest compliment anyone's ever given me," Ron said. "I've been told I'm a weird person." Ron grinned. "Yeah, all right. I think we're going to get along." They did. By the time the train had cleared London and was cutting through open countryside, Harry and Ron had blown through 2 rounds of pumpkin pasties and a pile of chocolate frogs from the trolley, and Ron was explaining Quidditch with the passionate intensity of a zealot converting the uninitiated. Harry listened and asked questions and laughed at the right moments, and beneath the easy surface of the conversation, a part of him, the part Griphook had trained, noted the things Ron didn't say. That his robes were patched at the elbows. That he tried to insist on paying for his own food and gone red when Harry waved it off. That the rat, Scabbers, apparently, was an heirloom pet rather than something Ron had chosen for himself. Small facts that assembled into a picture of a family stretched thin but held together by something money couldn't buy. Harry liked Ron. Genuinely, immediately, in a way that surprised him. He'd grown up around goblins, who communicated through sharpness and action, and the Dursleys, who communicated through cruelty and silence. Ron was neither of those things. Ron was warm and loud and said exactly what he was thinking at all times, and there was something deeply restful about that. The compartment door opened again. This time it was a girl. Bushy brown hair, front teeth slightly too large, already wearing her school robes with the tie done up to the collar. She had the energy of someone running on pure determination, and she stood in the doorway with the particular brand of confidence that comes from being the smartest person in every room you've ever been in and knowing that it won't help you make friends. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one," she said, and then her eyes swept the compartment, the sweet wrappers, the chocolate frog cards, the two boys mid-conversation, and something in her expression shifted from businesslike to tentatively hopeful. "Haven't seen a toad," Ron said. "Sorry. What about you?" She looked at Harry. Harry felt the gold. Specifically, he felt the absence of it. This girl carried no goblin-minted coins, no inherited wizard jewelry, no family heirlooms stamped with ancient house crests. She was Muggle-born. The realization hit him with a small, clarifying shock. Here was someone who existed entirely outside the system he controlled. Her parents' money was paper and copper, Bank of England, untouched by goblin craft. She was, in a very real sense, the one kind of person his power couldn't reach. He found this fascinating. "No toad," he said. "But you're welcome to sit down if you like. I'm Harry, this is Ron. Hermione Granger." She sat, perching on the edge of the seat like she might need to leave at any moment. "I'm Muggle-born. First witch in my family. I've already read all the textbooks cover to cover, and I know this sounds terribly eager but I'm honestly just so excited to be here I could burst." She said this all in one breath, then flushed, clearly having not intended to say quite so much. "Which textbook's your favorite?" Harry asked. She blinked, wrong-footed by someone engaging rather than retreating. "Hogwarts, a history. It's brilliant. Did you know the castle has 142 staircases?" "I didn't." "What are they made of?" "Stone, mostly. Some marble." "Why?" "Just curious about the construction." He was, but not for the reason she'd assume. He was wondering how much goblin-forged material was woven into the castle's bones. He could already feel Hogwarts in the distance, a dense, bright cluster in his gold sense, growing brighter as the train moved north. The castle was saturated with goblin craft. Centuries of it, layered and interlocked, threaded through the stone like veins of ore. "You're Harry Potter," Hermione said suddenly. "I read about you in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. I'm in 3 books. You're in quite a lot of books, actually. You defeated you-know-who as a baby. It's the most famous event in modern wizarding history. I was 1 year old. I didn't defeat anything. Something happened and I survived and he didn't, and anyone who writes a book about an infant's tactical prowess is probably not a reliable source." Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, and tilted her head. "That's, actually a very good point. None of the books I read had any primary sources. It was all second-hand accounts and speculation. Imagine that." She studied him with new eyes, and Harry could see the moment she mentally recategorized him from famous boy to interesting person. It happened quickly. Hermione Granger, he suspected, was the kind of person who revised her conclusions as fast as she gathered data. "What actually happened?" she asked. "I don't know. Not entirely. But I'm going to find out." The train rolled on. The countryside outside the window turned from green to gold to deep forested green, and the sky shifted from gray to a blue so vivid it looked painted. Ron taught Hermione about chocolate frogs while she pretended not to be charmed by the concept. Harry sat and listened and felt the gold singing beneath the train tracks. Literally, the rails had goblin-forged components, and let himself enjoy the strange, fragile pleasure of being a kid among kids for the first time in his life. At some point, the compartment door opened a third time. The boy from Madame Malkin stood in the doorway. Pale blonde hair slicked back. Pale gray eyes. Pale everything, really, as though the entire Malfoy genetic line had been slowly bleaching itself toward translucence over the centuries. He was flanked by two larger boys who had the look of furniture that had learned to walk. "They're saying Harry Potter's on the train," the blonde boy said. His eyes found Harry immediately. "So it's true, then. We met in Diagon Alley." "Briefly," Harry said. "I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." Ron made a small sound that might have been a stifled laugh. Draco's eyes snapped to him. "Think my name's funny, do you? Red hair, second-hand robes, you must be a Weasley. And you must be desperate for attention," Ron said pleasantly, "if you're going compartment to compartment introducing yourself." Draco's cheeks flushed. He turned back to Harry with visible effort, composing himself. "You'll find that some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort." He extended his hand. "I can help you there." Harry looked at the offered hand. Then he looked at Draco Malfoy, really looked, the way Griphook had taught him to look, reading the small tells that revealed what people were trying to hide. The rehearsed posture. The slightly too loud voice. The way Draco's eyes kept darting to Harry's reaction, checking, measuring, needing. This wasn't a boy acting on his own initiative. This was a boy performing a script written by someone else. Harry reached out with the gold sense, gently, precisely, and felt the Malfoy vault. It was one of the old ones, deep underground, packed with centuries of accumulated wealth. He felt every galleon, every artifact, every goblin-forged heirloom. He felt the wards and the protections and the investment accounts and the property deeds and the debts. Oh, the debts were interesting, and in the space of a single breath, he knew more about the Malfoy family's financial position than Draco would learn in his entire lifetime. The Malfoy vault currently holds approximately 412,000 galleons in liquid assets, Harry said conversationally. Plus property holdings, investment portfolios, and a rather extensive collection of goblin-forged artifacts, several of which were acquired through means that wouldn't survive a formal audit. Your family's net worth is impressive but highly leveraged. You're carrying significant debts to two other pure-blood families and a quietly restructured loan from Gringotts itself. He paused. Your father sent you here with specific instructions to befriend me, didn't he? The compartment was very quiet. Draco's hand was still extended. His face had gone from pale to white, not flushed, not angry, but the bloodless white of genuine shock. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I'm not going to shake your hand because you were told to offer it, Harry said. But I'm also not going to pretend we're enemies, because that's boring and I don't think you're actually the person your father wants you to be. He held Draco's gaze. If you want to come back later and talk to me as yourself instead of as Lucius Malfoy's ambassador, the door's open. Draco pulled his hand back. Something was happening behind those gray eyes, a tectonic shift, plates grinding against each other, the collision of everything he'd been taught with the first real challenge to any of it. He left without another word. His two flankers followed, casting confused looks over their shoulders. Ron let out a breath like he'd been holding it for a month. Bloody hell, Harry. Was that too much? Harry asked, genuinely uncertain. Social calibration was not his strongest skill, goblins didn't believe in subtlety, and the Dursleys had never spoken to him long enough for him to practice. That was magnificent, Hermione said, her eyes wide. How did you know all that? About his family's finances? I told you, Harry said to Ron. Long story. The sun was setting by the time the train began to slow. Harry changed into his robes, plain black, unadorned, though the ring on the chain around his neck glinted briefly as he pulled the robe over his head, and stood at the window to watch Hogwarts appear. It came into view around a bend in the track, rising above a black lake like something grown from the earth rather than built on it. Towers and turrets and great stone walls, lit from within by 1,000 windows that blazed gold against the darkening sky. It was enormous and ancient and achingly beautiful, and Harry felt it hit his gold sense like a wall of sound. The castle was saturated. Goblin craft threaded through every inch of it, in the foundations, the walls, the gates, the staircases, the window frames, the door handles, the chandeliers. Centuries of goblin-forged metal woven into the architecture like a second skeleton. Some of it was structural, holding the castle together against forces that would have reduced normal stone to rubble. Some of it was protective, wards and barriers and alarm systems of incredible sophistication. And some of it was, other. Older. Deeper. Things that had been built into the castle's bones at its founding and then forgotten by everyone except the metal itself. Harry could feel all of it. And all of it could feel him. It's something, isn't it? Ron said quietly beside him. Yeah, Harry said. It really is. They crossed the lake in boats. Hagrid, an enormous, kind-faced man who'd shouted for first years on the platform and then spent the entire boat ride telling Harry how he'd carried him from the ruins of his parents' house, sat in the lead boat and kept turning around to look at Harry with damp, emotional eyes. Last time I saw ya, you was a baby, Hagrid said for the third time. Tiny little thing. And now look at ya. Thank you for carrying me, Harry said, and meant it. I'd be dead if you hadn't. Hagrid blew his nose on something the size of a tablecloth and had to be reminded to steer. The castle grew larger as they approached, and Harry's sense of the goblin craft within it sharpened. He could feel individual objects now, a suit of armor on the second floor that was entirely goblin-forged, a chandelier in the great hall that contained alloys unknown to modern metallurgy, and deep below the castle, in a corridor on the third floor, something that blazed in his awareness like a bonfire. Protections. Layered, intricate, powerful. Goblin-forged locks and wards surrounding something that pulsed with its own energy. Whatever was being hidden behind those protections, it was important enough to warrant the finest goblin security work Harry had ever encountered. He filed this away and stepped out of the boat onto the shore. The entrance hall was vast and torchlit, and waiting for them at the top of a marble staircase was a tall, severe-looking witch in emerald robes who introduced herself as Professor McGonagall and delivered instructions about the sorting in a tone that suggested she had given this speech many times and was absolutely prepared to wait as long as necessary for silence. Thank you. Harry stood among the cluster of first years and felt the castle breathing around him. The stone hummed. The metal sang. Every goblin-forged element in the building resonated with his presence, a low harmonic vibration that was too subtle for anyone else to notice but made the torches flicker slightly and the suits of armor stand a fraction straighter. The doors to the great hall opened. For long tables stretched the length of an enormous room, packed with students. Above them, the ceiling was an impossible canvas of sky, dark blue, scattered with stars, drifting with wisps of cloud that moved independently of any wind. Candles floated everywhere, hundreds of them, casting warm unsteady light over faces turned expectantly toward the doors. And at the head of the room, at a high table facing the students, sat the professors. Harry's eyes found Albus Dumbledore immediately. He was impossible to miss, tall, thin, ancient, with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles and robes of deep purple spangled with golden stars. He radiated a particular kind of power that Harry recognized from years of being around old, dangerous goblins, the calm certainty of someone who had spent so long being the most powerful person in any given room that it had become as natural as breathing. Dumbledore's eyes found Harry just as quickly. Across the length of the great hall, through the press of students and the glow of floating candles, their gazes locked. Harry felt the headmaster reach for him, not physically, not even magically in any way he could have described, but a subtle pressure, a gentle probing, like fingers testing the edge of a curtain. Legilimency, probably. Griphook had warned him about this. Dumbledore was one of the most accomplished mind-readers alive. Harry's occlumency was not wizard-trained. It was goblin-forged, brutal, absolute, a wall of golden fire that surrounded his thoughts the way Gringotts vaults surrounded treasure. He didn't push back against Dumbledore's probe. He simply existed behind his defenses and let the old wizard feel their weight. The pressure withdrew. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but Harry caught the micro-movement, a slight tightening around the eyes, a fractional adjustment of the jaw. Surprise. Concern. The dawning realization that the boy he'd expected to arrive at Hogwarts, orphaned, ignorant, grateful, was not the boy who had arrived. Good, Harry thought. Professor McGonagall set a stool at the front of the hall and placed upon it a battered, patched wizard's hat. The hat twitched, a rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and it began to sing. Harry listened politely. The song was a potted history of the 4 Hogwarts houses, Gryffindor for the brave, Ravenclaw for the wise, Hufflepuff for the loyal, Slytherin for the ambitious. Simple categories for a complicated world. He could already feel the gold sense reading the room, noting which students wore which colors, which tables had the most inherited wealth, which houses the oldest families favored. Slytherin was the richest, by a comfortable margin. Gryffindor was next. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw trailed behind. The economic stratification of the wizarding world, rendered in seating arrangements. The sorting began. Students were called alphabetically. Harry watched each one approach the stool, trying to read faces the way Griphook had taught him, the nervous, the eager, the terrified, the smugly confident. Granger, Hermione. Hermione practically ran to the stool. The hat dropped over her eyes, and for a long minute nothing happened. Then the brim opened and bellowed, Gryffindor, and Hermione beamed like sunrise and hurried to the table on the far left. Malfoy, Draco. The hat barely touched Draco's head before screaming, Slytherin. Draco walked to the Slytherin table with his chin up, but Harry caught the quick sideways glance in his direction. Checking. Always checking. Potter, Harry. The hall erupted in whispers. Harry walked to the stool with the easy, unhurried stride he'd learned from years of walking through Gringotts under the eyes of creatures who could smell fear like blood in water. He sat. McGonagall lowered the hat onto his head, and the brim fell past his eyes, and the world went dark. Well, 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 said a small voice in his ear. This is new. Harry said nothing. He waited. Oh, you're patient. That's unusual in an 11-year-old. The hat's voice was dry, amused, and very old. Let me see, plenty of courage, yes, a good mind, loyalty in abundance, but what's this? A pause. What on earth is this? The debt of gold, Harry said silently. I can feel it. It's like trying to sort a boy who's got a dragon sleeping in his chest. Your mind is layered. The wizard parts are familiar enough, bright, determined, a deep vein of anger you've learned to channel rather than suppress. But underneath that there's something that isn't human at all. Goblin magic, ancient and heavy, woven right into your thoughts. Does that change where I belong? It complicates things delightfully. Slytherin would nurture your ambition and your strategic mind, don't look like that, ambition isn't a dirty word. Ravenclaw would feed your hunger for knowledge. Hufflepuff would honor your loyalty and your sense of justice. And Gryffindor? Gryffindor is where you'd be most uncomfortable. It would demand that you lead with your heart instead of your head, that you act on instinct instead of calculation. It would put you in a house full of people who charge into danger first and think about consequences never. The hat paused. Which is precisely why it's the right choice for you. You've been trained by goblins to think like a general. You need to learn to think like a person. Harry considered this. It was, annoyingly, good advice. Gryffindor, he agreed. Gryffindor, the hat bellowed, and the table on the far left exploded. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table through a storm of cheering and sat beside Hermione, who was applauding so hard her hands were red. Ron, sorted a few minutes later into Gryffindor as well, threw himself into the seat on Harry's other side and said, "Brilliant, 6 times in a row." The feast materialized on golden plates: roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, mountains of vegetables, bowls of chips, platters of pudding. Ron fell on the food with the focused intensity of a natural disaster. Hermione began interrogating a nearby ghost about the castle's history. Harry ate and listened and felt the gold in the plates beneath his fingers and the metal in the walls around him and the dense, blazing knot of protections far below on the third floor. And Dumbledore watched him from the high table with an expression that, for the first time in many decades, Albus Dumbledore could not quite control. The first week of term passed in a blur of moving staircases, talking portraits, and classes that ranged from fascinating to absurd. Transfiguration with McGonagall was precise and demanding. Charms with Flitwick was enthusiastic and occasionally explosive. Herbology with Sprout was earthy and genuine. History of Magic with Binns was the only class where Harry's gold sense was more interesting than the lecture, which wasn't saying much because Binns could make a goblin rebellion sound like a weather report. Defense against the dark arts was taught by a man named Quirrell, who wore a purple turban and smelled like garlic and stuttered through his sentences with the pained hesitance of someone whose mouth and brain were operating on different schedules. Harry didn't trust him. It wasn't the stuttering. Harry had learned from goblins that people who appeared weak were often the most dangerous. It wasn't even the garlic smell, though that was odd. It was something deeper, something the gold sense picked up like a wrong note in a familiar song. There was goblin-forged metal on Quirrell, a clasp on his turban, barely visible, holding the fabric in place, and it was screaming. Not literally. Not audibly. But in the language of the gold sense, the metal was in distress. It resonated with wrongness, the way a tuning fork vibrates when struck against something broken. Whatever was under that turban, the metal didn't like it. Harry sat through the first Dada lesson with his attention split between Quirrell's stammering lecture on vampires and the silent shriek of the turban clasp, and when the class ended, he walked straight to the Ollery and sent a letter to Griphook. Something wrong with the Dada professor. The metal near him is frightened. Do goblins have a word for that? The reply came that evening, delivered by a Gringotts courier owl that was larger and meaner than any bird at Hogwarts. Yes. The word is, possessed. Be careful. Harry folded the letter, tucked it into his robes, and went to dinner. Potions was in the dungeons. The classroom was cold and dim, lined with jars of things that floated in murky liquid and stared at passers-by. Professor Snape stood at the front in billowing black robes, pale and hook-nosed and radiating the particular energy of someone who had made a career out of contempt. Ah, yes, Snape said when he reached Harry's name on the roll. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. The word dripped with something more personal than standard disdain. Harry met Snape's black eyes and felt the probe, another Legilimens, though cruder than Dumbledore, a battering ram where the headmaster had been a lockpick. Harry's goblin-forged occlumency turned it aside without effort, and Snape's expression tightened. Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The question was designed to embarrass. First-year material buried in an advanced context, aimed at a boy Snape expected to be unprepared. The draught of living death, Harry said. A sleeping potion of significant potency. Asphodel and wormwood are also, in Victorian flower language, a message of bitter regret and absence, which seems relevant, given that you knew my mother. The dungeon went silent. Snape's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes cracked, a hairline fracture in the wall of hostility, there and gone so fast that nobody else caught it. 10 points from Gryffindor, Snape said, for being an insufferable show-off. 5 of those points back, Harry said calmly, because I answered correctly and the grading criteria posted on your door specify that correct answers earn house points. The silence deepened. Ron's mouth was hanging open. Hermione looked like she was witnessing a miracle and a disaster simultaneously. Snape stared at Harry for a long, charged moment. Then, with the air of a man who was going to regret this conversation for the rest of the day, he said, 5 points to Gryffindor for a correct answer. Now sit down and stop talking. Harry sat. The lesson continued. Snape was brutal and exacting and clearly brilliant, and he spent the entire hour pretending Harry didn't exist, which was itself a kind of answer to the question Harry had asked. After class, Ron grabbed Harry's arm in the corridor. "How did you know about his mum?" "Your mum? That whole flower language bit?" "Grip hook," Harry said. "He believes in comprehensive intelligence gathering. When I was 8, he put together dossiers on every professor at Hogwarts. Severus Snape, former Death Eater, current potions master, was friends with my mother Lily Evans before Hogwarts. Their friendship ended badly when he fell in with Voldemort's crowd. He spent 15 years punishing himself for choices he made as a teenager, and he was going to take that out on me because I look like my father." Ron's face went through the usual processing sequence. "Your goblin made dossiers on your future teachers. Griphook is very thorough. That's either really smart or really paranoid. In goblin culture, there's no difference." Hermione caught up with them, slightly out of breath. "Harry, you can't just take points back from a professor." "I didn't take them. I pointed out that his own written policy required them. There's a difference." "There really isn't." "There really is. And if Snape wants to argue the point, he's welcome to. His salary comes from the Hogwarts endowment, which is held at Gringotts, which," Harry stopped. "Never mind." "Which what?" Harry shook his head. "Some cards weren't worth playing yet. Let's go to lunch. Ron looks like he's going to eat the wall." "I'm not going to eat the wall," Ron said. "But I wouldn't say no to a sandwich." They were halfway to the Great Hall when the staircase beneath their feet shuddered and swung sideways, depositing them on the third-floor corridor. Harry felt it immediately, the blazing knot of goblin-forged protections, much stronger now that he was close. They pulsed in his awareness like a second heart, and beneath them, wrapped in their embrace, something else pulsed. Something that was neither gold nor goblin but radiated a power that made his scar tingle. "We're not supposed to be here," Hermione whispered. "Dumbledore said the third-floor corridor is forbidden. He said anyone who went there would die a very painful death." "He said that to a roomful of children," Harry said. "Which is either the worst safety protocol in educational history, or a test to see who's curious enough to come looking." "It's not a test, Harry. It's a warning. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Ron peered down the corridor. "There's a door at the end. Big one. Locked, probably." "Definitely locked," Harry said. He could feel the lock, goblin-forged, heavy, keyed to specific magical signatures. But locks, even goblin locks, answered to the gold tongue. "We should go." "Thank you," Hermione said, relieved. "Not because I'm afraid of what's behind the door. Because I want to know more before I open it." "You can open it." "I can open any lock that was ever made by a goblin." "Which is most of them." Harry turned from the corridor and started back toward the staircase. "But opening a door you don't understand is stupid, and Griphook would kill me." They went to lunch. But the blazing knot of protection stayed in Harry's awareness, pulsing quietly, and the thing they surrounded pulsed with it, and somewhere in the castle Professor Quirrell's turban clasp screamed its silent scream, and Harry began to assemble the pieces. 2 days later, he was summoned to the headmaster's office. The gargoyle that guarded the entrance leapt aside before Harry could speak. The gold sense reached the goblin-forged mechanisms in the statue a fraction of a second before he arrived, and they opened of their own accord. The spiral staircase carried him upward in silence. Dumbledore's office was a magnificent clutter of instruments, books, and curiosities. Silver devices clicked and whirred on spindly-legged tables. Portraits of former headmasters dozed in their frames. A magnificent red and gold bird perched on a stand near the desk, watching Harry with black eyes that reminded him powerfully of Ragnarok. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, half-moon spectacles glinting. "Harry," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming." "Lemon drop?" "No, thank you." Harry sat in the offered chair, which was comfortable and positioned slightly lower than Dumbledore's, a basic negotiating tactic that Griphook would have noted with amusement. You wanted to see me. I did. I've been meaning to have this conversation since the start of term, but I confess I've been, gathering my thoughts. A pause. The warmth was still there, but something else moved beneath it, a careful, measured assessment. You are not the boy I expected, Harry. What did you expect? A child raised by muggles. Unfamiliar with our world. In need of guidance and protection. You expected a child you could shape. The words landed between them like a stone in still water. Dumbledore's expression flickered, a micro-adjustment that Harry read as clearly as a sentence. I expected, Dumbledore said carefully, a child I could help. You had 10 years to help me. You placed me with the Dursleys, a family that locked me in a cupboard and starved me. You appointed yourself my magical guardian and used that position to access my family vault without my knowledge. You directed Potter funds to an organization called the Order of the Phoenix without authorization. Harry's voice was level, conversational. He wasn't angry. Anger was a tool, and this wasn't the moment for it. I know these things because the goblins told me. I know them because the gold itself told me. So when you say you wanted to help, Headmaster, I need you to explain what help looks like in your framework, because in mine it doesn't involve cupboards. The office was very quiet. The silver instruments clicked. The phoenix ruffled its feathers. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. And then something happened that Harry did not expect, the mask came down. Not all the way, Dumbledore was too old and too practiced for that, but the grandfatherly warmth dimmed, and what was beneath it was older and sadder and more complicated. You are right, Dumbledore said. About the Dursleys, about the vault, about the Order. You are right, and I am sorry. Harry waited. An apology was a start, not an answer. I placed you with the Dursleys because your mother's sacrifice created a protection tied to her blood. As long as you live with her sister, you are shielded from Voldemort in ways that no other ward can match. This protection is real, Harry. It has saved your life more than once, in ways you cannot detect. The blood wards, Harry said. I know about them. The goblins analyzed them when I was 7. They're genuine, I'm not disputing that. I'm disputing the idea that blood wards require a child to be abused to function. Another flicker. Deeper this time. Something that might have been shame. I did not know the extent of their treatment of you. I should have checked. I should have, Dumbledore paused, and for a moment the weariness showed through. I have made many mistakes in my life, Harry, and my handling of your childhood is among the worst. I offer no excuses. I can only offer the truth of my intentions. I was afraid. Voldemort is not dead. He will return. And I have spent 10 years trying to ensure that when he does, you will be ready. By keeping me ignorant and dependent. By keeping you alive and hidden. The goblins have clearly given you a different preparation than I intended, and I am forced to admit that their approach may have been more comprehensive. This cost him. Harry could see it, the effort of conceding ground to a strategy he hadn't controlled. I underestimated you. I underestimated the goblins. And I underestimated Ragnarok, who was apparently far wiser in death than I gave him credit for in life. You knew Ragnarok? I knew of him. Most senior wizards did. He was considered a relic, a deposed king clinging to a dead claim. The ministry dismissed him. I, to my shame, did not investigate further. Dumbledore leaned forward. But Harry, the power you carry is extraordinary, and it makes you a target in ways that go beyond Voldemort. The ministry is already agitated. Cornelius Fudge has held 3 emergency meetings about you in the past week. There are people who will try to control you, legislate against you, or destroy you, not because of who you are but because of what you represent. A non-pure blood holding the keys to pure blood wealth. Precisely. I know, Harry said. I've been dealing with that since I was 7, when the ministry first sent someone to Gringotts. Headmaster, I appreciate you being honest with me. I'm going to be honest with you in return. He met Dumbledore's eyes directly, and this time he let the gold sense flare, just slightly, just enough for a wizard of Dumbledore's sensitivity to feel it. The air between them warmed. The silver instruments on the desk trembled. I am not your weapon, Harry said. I am not your project. I am not the boy who lived as your books describe him, a symbol to be aimed at a dark wizard when the time is right. I am the gold tongue. I hold the debt of gold. I control the economic infrastructure of the entire wizarding world, and I am 11 years old, and I came to this school to learn and to find out what happened to my parents and to decide for myself what kind of person I'm going to be. The phoenix let out a low, musical cry. It sounded like agreement. If you want to be my ally, Harry continued, then be my ally. Tell me what you know about Voldemort, about the prophecy. Yes, I know there's a prophecy, about what happened the night my parents died. Share information instead of hoarding it. Treat me as a partner, not a pawn. And if you can't do that, then stay out of my way, because I promise you, Headmaster, with respect, I will not be managed. Dumbledore sat very still for a very long time. Then, slowly, he nodded. I hear you. I don't agree with everything you've said, I am old and stubborn and I believe in the necessity of some secrets. But I hear you, and I will try. A pause. May I ask you one thing in return? Ask. The protections on the third-floor corridor. You felt them. Since the moment I entered the castle. I must ask you to leave them alone. What is hidden there is bait, a trap, set for someone who is already in this castle and searching for it. If you disturb the protections, the trap fails. Harry felt the honesty of this. It rang true in the gold sense, mostly. There were layers Dumbledore wasn't sharing, but the core claim was genuine. Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. Actually blinked, the physical manifestation of surprise overriding decades of composure. How, the goblin-forged clasp on his turban is in distress. I've never felt metal react that way to a person. Something is riding him, something dark, something that makes goblin craft recoil. The goblins have a word for it. Possessed. Harry stood. I'll leave your protections alone, Headmaster. For now. But if whatever's in Quirrell becomes a threat to the students at this school, I will act, and I won't ask permission first. Understood. Good. Then we have an arrangement. Harry moved toward the door, then stopped. The Potter Vault. I've already closed the leak, but the funds that were redirected to the Order, I'm not asking for them back. My parents fought Voldemort. They'd probably have approved of the expenditure. But don't ever take from me again without asking. The next time won't end in a conversation. He left the office. The spiral staircase carried him down. The gargoyle leapt back into position behind him, and Harry walked through the corridors of Hogwarts with the castle humming around him, every piece of goblin-forged metal vibrating softly in recognition, and felt something he hadn't expected. Respect. Not for Dumbledore's methods, those were deeply flawed, but for the old man's willingness to listen. He'd expected bluster, manipulation, dismissal. What he'd gotten was something approaching honesty. It wasn't enough. But it was a beginning. That night, in the Gryffindor common room, Harry sat by the fire with Ron and Hermione and said nothing about his meeting with Dumbledore. Some things weren't for sharing yet. Instead, he listened to Ron lose spectacularly at wizard chess against a 7th year, and watched Hermione devour a book on magical theory that was twice as thick as her head, and felt the simple, extraordinary warmth of belonging somewhere. The gold hummed in the walls. The fire crackled. Outside the windows, the Scottish night pressed dark and starry against the glass. And deep below the castle, in a corridor forbidden to students, the goblin-forged protections pulsed around their secret, and waited. Harry had been at Hogwarts for 3 weeks when the Ministry made its move. He was at breakfast on a Thursday morning, bacon, eggs, toast, the comfortable routine of a meal shared with friends, when the doors of the great hall opened and 4 wizards walked in. They wore the plum-colored robes of the Wizengamot, and they walked with the particular self-importance of people who believed their authority was derived from the natural order of things rather than the fragile consensus of a society that could revoke it at any time. The leader was a witch Harry didn't recognize, tall, iron-haired, with the brittle posture of someone who'd never bent for anything. Behind her came a clerk carrying a scroll, and 2 aurors in red robes who hung back near the doors with the professional discomfort of people who knew this was a bad idea but had been ordered to do it anyway. The hall went quiet. Students turned to stare. At the high table, Dumbledore set down his teacup with deliberate precision. "Madam Longstrider," he said. "This is unexpected." "Headmaster." The witch, Longstrider, didn't look at Dumbledore. Her eyes found Harry immediately, locked on, and she strode toward the Gryffindor table with the clerk scurrying behind her. "Harry James Potter?" "Yes," Harry said. He didn't stand. "I am Madam Evelina Longstrider, Special Adjudicator of the Wizengamot. I have been appointed by the Minister for Magic to serve you with an order of compliance under Section 47 of the Magical Governance Act of 1689, requiring you to submit to a full audit of all financial authorities, powers, and instruments currently held in your name, and to temporarily suspend the exercise of any and all goblin-derived privileges until such audit is complete." She said all of this in one breath, the way people do when they've rehearsed and don't want to be interrupted. Harry took a bite of toast. "Mr. Potter," Longstrider said, with the slight edge of someone who expected a reaction and didn't get one. "Do you understand what I've just told you?" "Perfectly. You want me to give up control of the debt of gold while the ministry investigates whether I should have it. Which is a bit like asking the ocean to stop being wet while you investigate whether water should be allowed." Ron choked on his pumpkin juice. Hermione gripped the edge of the table. "This is a lawful order, Mr. Potter. Failure to comply, the Magical Governance Act of 1689 applies to witches, wizards, and magical creatures within ministry jurisdiction." Harry set down his toast. "The debt of gold is not a financial authority. It is not a power granted by the ministry. It is a sovereign compact of the Goblin Nation, predating the ministry by approximately 3,000 years, and it exists outside your jurisdiction the same way the movement of tides exists outside the jurisdiction of a harbor master." Longstrider's mouth opened and closed. The clerk behind her was frantically scribbling. "Furthermore," Harry continued, "Section 47 of the Act you cited deals with the seizure of assets during criminal investigation. I have not been charged with a crime. No investigation has been opened. This order is therefore not a legal instrument, it is an act of political intimidation dressed up as process, and the minister knows it, which is why he sent you instead of coming himself." The hall was utterly silent. Every student, every professor, every ghost floating near the ceiling was watching. Harry pushed his plate aside and stood. He was 11 years old and several inches shorter than Madame Longstrider, and it didn't matter in the slightest. "I want to be very clear," he said, and his voice carried without him raising it, the way voices carry in a space where the walls are listening. "I have no quarrel with the Ministry of Magic. I have no interest in destabilizing the wizarding economy. I am an 11-year-old student who wants to learn magic, eat breakfast, and be left alone." He paused. "But if the ministry insists on treating me as a threat, I will respond accordingly. Do you understand what I mean by that, Madame Longstrider?" Longstrider understood. He could see it in her face, the moment of realization, the rapid calculation, the dawning awareness that the boy standing in front of her could, if he chose, make every galleon in Britain worthless by tea time. "I will relay your response to the minister," she said stiffly. "Please do. And tell him I meant what I said in my letter. I'm happy to meet at a time of mutual convenience. But I don't respond well to ambush, and I respond even less well to threats." Harry sat back down and pulled his plate toward him. "Your aurors look uncomfortable, by the way. You should let them leave." Longstrider left. The Aurors followed with visible relief. The clerk was still scribbling as the doors closed behind them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Fred Weasley, or possibly George, started a slow clap from halfway down the Gryffindor table, and the hall erupted. Harry ate his toast. That evening, an owl arrived from Gringotts. Not Griphook's usual terse correspondence, this was an official communication on heavy parchment, sealed with the Gringotts crest. Gold tongue. The Goblin Council commends your handling of the Ministry's overreach. Elder Bogrod has formally recorded the incident and invokes Treaty Clause 114, any further Ministry attempts to interfere with the debt of gold will be considered an act of aggression against the Goblin Nation. You have the full backing of every vault, every warrior, and every forge. Additionally, we are aware of the object hidden in your school's third-floor corridor. It was placed there by Albus Dumbledore with Gringotts' cooperation. The protections are ours. We built them at Dumbledore's request to safeguard the Philosopher's Stone, created by Nicholas Flamel. This information is now yours by right. The possessed one you identified, be cautious. Goblin craft can detect possession but cannot cure it. Whatever rides the man called Quirrell is old and hungry and patient. Don't skip meals. Griphook Harry read the letter twice. The Philosopher's Stone. He'd read about it, transmutation of base metals to gold, production of the elixir of life. Alchemical legend made real, hidden in a school full of children, guarded by goblin protections that called to him like a beacon. And Quirrell, possessed Quirrell, was after it. Harry folded the letter and looked out the window at the grounds, dark under a waning moon. The lake was a sheet of black glass. The forbidden forest was a wall of deeper black beyond it. Somewhere in the castle, a man with more actions. Continue Chapter 3, What Gold Cannot Buy. October came to Hogwarts like a slow exhale, the grounds turning amber and copper, the lake steaming in the mornings, the castle settling deeper into its ancient bones as the temperature dropped. Harry felt the change in the metal, the goblin-forged elements throughout the castle contracted minutely in the cold, their resonance shifting to a lower register, and the overall hum of the place became something darker and more contemplative, like a cathedral organ holding a single sustained note. He'd been at school for a month, and the rhythm of it had become familiar. Classes in the morning. Lunch with Ron and Hermione. Afternoons split between homework, exploring the castle, and the private study sessions he'd carved out for himself in an unused classroom on the 5th floor, where he practiced wand magic alongside the goblin craft he'd been training in for 6 years and tried to figure out how the two systems interacted. They didn't interact well. That was the fundamental problem. Wand magic was elegant, precise, channeled through a focus object and shaped by intent and incantation. Goblin magic was raw, material, embedded in physical objects through processes that had more in common with metallurgy than spellwork. The two traditions had developed in parallel for millennia, occasionally touching but never merging, like rivers that ran side by side without mixing. Harry was the confluence. The debt of gold had woven goblin magic into his blood, and the holly wand had bonded to that blended core, and now every spell he cast came out slightly different than it should have. His levitation charm didn't just lift objects, it resonated with any metal in the object, making goblin-forged items float with eerie stability while mundane materials wobbled and drifted. His lumos was tinged with gold. His transfiguration work had a permanence that made McGonagall frown and then go very quiet and then assign him extra reading that wasn't in the first-year curriculum. He was sitting in his 5th-floor classroom on a Tuesday evening, practicing the softening charm on a block of iron, when the door opened and Hermione walked in. She stopped in the doorway. Harry was cross-legged on the floor, wand in one hand, the iron block hovering in front of him, and the air between them was thick with a visible golden shimmer that pulsed in time with his breathing. "Harry," she said. "What is that?" He let the block settle to the floor. The golden shimmer faded. "I've been trying to combine wand techniques with goblin craft. It's not going well." "Not going." She stepped into the room and crouched beside the iron block. "This was supposed to be a softening charm." "Yes." "Harry, This iron is now woven with a self-repairing lattice that I've only ever read about in Advanced Metalwork Theory, which is a 7th-year elective. She looked up at him. What do you mean it's not going well? I meant to soften it. Instead I improved it. That's like trying to make tea and accidentally building a kettle. She sat down properly, legs folded, and fixed him with the look he'd come to recognize over the past month, the one that meant she was going to ask questions until she understood everything, and he could either cooperate or be besieged. Explain the goblin magic to me, she said. Properly. Not the vague version you've been giving Ron and me. The real version. Harry hesitated. Not because he didn't trust Hermione, he did, with a certainty that had surprised him by how quickly it had developed, but because the truth of the debt of gold was vast and strange and he'd never tried to explain it to someone who didn't already live inside the goblin world. All right, he said. But it's going to sound mental. Everything about your life sounds mental. I've adjusted. He told her. Not everything, not the details of goblin politics or the specifics of Ragnar's death or the exact scope of his control over the wizarding economy. But the core of it, that goblin magic was fundamentally different from wizard magic, rooted in material reality rather than abstract will. That goblins didn't cast spells, they made things, imbuing physical objects with power through processes that involved heat and pressure and a connection to the earth that wizards had lost, or perhaps never had. That the debt of gold connected Harry to every object that had ever been touched by goblin craft, giving him awareness of and authority over a vast network of magical artifacts that underpinned the entire wizarding world. Hermione listened without interrupting, a feat that, for her, required genuine effort. So when you cast a wand spell, she said slowly, the goblin magic in your blood reaches out to any goblin-crafted material nearby and, what? Augments the spell. Interferes with it, mostly. The two systems don't speak the same language. It's like trying to play a piano and a drum at the same time, you can do it, but it takes coordination I haven't figured out yet. But the iron block was an accident. I was trying for one thing and the goblin magic did something else entirely. Something better, honestly, but I can't control it. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Harry could see her thinking, could practically see the gears turning, the connections being made, the framework being assembled. Have you considered, she said, that you're approaching this wrong? You're trying to use wand magic and having the goblin magic interfere. What if you reversed it? Used the goblin magic as the primary channel and let the wand amplify it? Harry stared at her. In 6 years of goblin education, in months of private practice, in every conversation he'd had with Griphook about the interaction between the two magical traditions, nobody had suggested anything so simple or so obvious. That's either brilliant or insane, he said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She was smiling now, the fierce, bright smile of someone who'd found a puzzle worth solving. Try it. Focus on the goblin magic first, the gold sense, the connection to the metal. Then use the wand as a focus for that instead of for a wizard spell. Harry picked up the iron block. He held it in his left hand and his wand in his right, and instead of thinking of an incantation, he reached for the gold sense. The block lit up in his awareness, every atom of iron, every impurity, every grain of its structure mapped in perfect detail. He felt its history, where it had been mined, how it had been smelted, the hands that had shaped it. Mundane iron, never touched by goblin craft, but iron nonetheless, and iron answered to the earth, and the earth answered to the old magic. He pointed his wand at the block and pushed, not a spell, not an incantation, just the gold sense channeled through the phoenix feather core of his holly wand. The iron sang. It was the only word for it. The block rose from his palm and hung in the air, spinning slowly, and as it spun it reshaped itself, flowing like water, folding like paper, the metal restructuring at a molecular level into something that was no longer crude iron but something finer, denser, alive with a faint golden light that pulsed like a heartbeat. When it stopped spinning, it was a perfect sphere. Smooth as glass. Warm to the touch. And when Harry reached for it with the gold sense, it answered the way goblin-forged artifacts answered, with recognition, with loyalty, with the quiet certainty of metal that had been claimed. "Harry," Hermione whispered. "You just goblin forged something. With a wand. That shouldn't be possible." "No," Harry said, turning the sphere in his hands. "It shouldn't." They looked at each other across the golden light of the impossible object, and something shifted between them, a deepening of the trust that had been building since the train, an understanding that they were both, in their own ways, operating outside the boundaries of what the wizarding world considered normal. "You can't tell anyone about this," Harry said. "Not yet. If the Ministry finds out I can forge goblin-quality artifacts with a wand, I know. They're already terrified of you. And Dumbledore would want to study it, catalog it, fit it into his plans. I know that too." Hermione picked up the sphere, turned it over, and handed it back with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious. "Your secret's safe. But Harry, you need to keep practicing. If you can do this with a lump of iron, imagine what you could do with actual goblin-forged materials." "I'd rather not imagine that in a school full of children." "Fair point." She stood, brushed off her robes, and headed for the door. Then she stopped. "Harry. Thank you for telling me. I know you didn't have to. You earned it. That idea about reversing the channel, Griphook's been advising me for 6 years and he never suggested it. Griphook's a goblin. He thinks in goblin frameworks. I'm Muggle-born, I don't have any framework at all, so I have to build my own." She shrugged. "Sometimes starting from nothing is an advantage." She left. Harry sat alone with the iron sphere cooling in his palm and thought about what she'd said, and about the quiet revolution that was taking shape in his hands, and about the fact that the most valuable thing he'd found at Hogwarts wasn't a class or a secret or a weapon. It was a friend who made him think in new directions. Halloween arrived on a Friday, and the castle dressed itself for the occasion with the enthusiasm of an institution that had been doing this for 1,000 years and still enjoyed it. Pumpkins the size of garden sheds lined the corridors. Bats swooped in formation above the staircases. The suits of armor had been enchanted to groan and rattle their visors at passing students, which Harry found mildly annoying because the goblin-forged ones kept trying to bow to him instead, breaking character. The feast was spectacular. The great hall glittered with 1,000 candles, and the food appeared in waves, soups and roasts and pies and towers of sweets that made Ron's eyes go glassy with joy. Harry ate and laughed and felt the castle celebrating around him, every piece of metal vibrating with the low-frequency hum of ancient magic responding to a date that had been significant since long before the school was built. He was reaching for a slice of pumpkin pie when the doors of the great hall burst open. Quirrell sprinted up the center aisle, turban askew, face white with terror that Harry's gold sense immediately flagged as 90% performance and 10% genuine. The turban clasp was shrieking in his awareness, louder than usual, agitated, straining against whatever it was forced to contain. "Troll!" Quirrell screamed. "Troll in the dungeons!" He skidded to a halt in front of the high table, swayed dramatically, and added, "Thought you ought to know." Then he collapsed. The hall erupted. Students screamed, leapt from benches, surged toward the doors. Dumbledore's voice cut through the chaos, "Silence." And the room obeyed, not because of the volume but because of the power behind it, a wave of magical authority that pressed against Harry's gold sense like a hand against his chest. "Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately. Teachers, follow me to the dungeons." The machinery of crisis response engaged. Prefects began herding students toward the doors. Professors filed out behind Dumbledore. And Quirrell, who had supposedly fainted, was already getting to his feet and slipping away in the confusion, not toward the dungeons where the troll was, but toward the stairs that led upward. Toward the 3rd floor. Harry caught Ron's arm. "Where's Hermione?" Ron's face went blank with confusion, then horror. "She wasn't at the feast. She's been in the 1st floor bathroom all afternoon. Lavender said something about her crying. The troll came in from the dungeons." The first-floor bathroom is between the dungeons and wherever that troll is heading. Harry was already moving against the flow of students. Come on. We should tell a professor, the professors are all going the wrong direction. Ron. Come on. They ran. The corridors emptied quickly as the student body funneled toward their common rooms, and within minutes Harry and Ron were alone in a first-floor hallway that smelled like something between a locker room and a sewer. The smell intensified as they rounded a corner, and then they heard it, a low, rhythmic grunting, punctuated by the crash of something heavy hitting stone. The troll was 12 feet tall. It filled the corridor like a boulder in a drainpipe, gray-skinned and lumpy, dragging a wooden club the size of a small tree. It was moving with the aimless destructive energy of something too stupid to have a plan but too large to need one, smashing torch brackets and splintering doors as it went. It was heading straight for the girls' bathroom. And from behind the bathroom door, Harry could hear Hermione screaming. "Oh God," Ron said. He'd gone the color of old cheese. "Oh God, oh God, oh, Ron. Focus." Harry drew his wand. "I need you to distract it." "Distract it? How do I distract throw something?" "Yell. Be loud. You're good at being loud." "That is not a compliment right now, Harry. It's a tactical observation. Go." Ron went. He scooped a chunk of broken masonry off the floor and hurled it at the troll's back, screaming, "Oh I. You great ugly," and then a word that would have gotten him detention in any other circumstance. The troll turned. It was slow, the head swiveled like a turret on a bad bearing, and when it saw Ron standing at the far end of the corridor, small and red-haired and absolutely terrified, it grunted with what might have been interest and started lumbering toward him. Harry moved. He sprinted past the troll, keeping close to the wall, and hit the bathroom door at full speed. It crashed open and he found Hermione huddled under the sinks, soaking wet, her eyes huge. "Harry, come on. Now. Move." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door, but they were too late. The troll had lost interest in Ron, or possibly just forgotten about him, because its attention span seemed to be measured in single-digit seconds, and turned back toward the bathroom. It filled the doorway, blocking the exit, and raised its club. Harry planted his feet. He raised his wand, reached for the gold cents, and found what he was looking for, the iron pipes running through the walls and ceiling of the bathroom. Old pipes, mundane iron, but iron nonetheless. He'd been practicing with iron for weeks. He knew its voice. He pushed. Every pipe in the bathroom ripped free simultaneously. They tore out of the walls in a scream of metal and stone, water erupting from the broken connections, and converged on the troll like a swarm of iron snakes. They wrapped around its legs, its arms, its torso, coiling and tightening with the irresistible force of metal obeying the gold tongue's will. The troll roared. It thrashed, swinging the club wildly, smashing sinks and mirrors. But the pipes held. They constricted, not enough to crush. Harry wasn't trying to kill it, just hold it, and the troll's movements slowed, its roars fading to confused grunts as the iron cage tightened around it. Ron appeared in the doorway, soaked with water, staring. "Right," he said faintly. "Yeah. That works too." The troll struggled once more, then sagged. The club fell from its fingers and hit the flooded floor with a splash. Harry held the pipes in place, maintaining the connection through the wand, and felt the effort as a dull ache behind his eyes, nothing he couldn't handle, but a reminder that even the gold tongue had limits. "Are you hurt?" he asked Hermione. She was standing in 6 inches of water, her robes drenched, her hair plastered to her face, staring at the 12-foot troll wrapped in bathroom plumbing. She started. "How did you, the pipes, we can have a technical discussion later." "Are you hurt?" "No. No, I'm fine." "Harry, that was, footsteps. Running footsteps, coming fast." McGonagall swept around the corner in a swirl of tartan, followed by Snape, who was limping, Harry noticed, favoring his right leg, and a breathless, white-faced Quirrell. McGonagall took in the scene, the destroyed bathroom, the unconscious troll, the 3 first-years standing in ankle-deep water, and the iron pipes wrapped around the troll in a configuration that defied the normal relationship between plumbing and architecture. "What," she said, in a voice that could have cut diamond, "is the meaning of this?" "The troll was heading for Hermione," Harry said. "She was in the bathroom and didn't know about the feast evacuation. Ron and I came to get her. You came too. Instead of alerting a teacher, the teachers were going to the dungeons. The troll was on the first floor. There wasn't time." Harry held McGonagall's gaze steadily. "I understand why you're upset, Professor. But if we'd followed protocol, Hermione would be dead." The word landed hard. McGonagall's expression shifted, from anger through reluctant acknowledgement to something that might have been grudging respect. 5 points from Gryffindor for reckless endangerment, she said. And 20 points to Gryffindor each, for the 3 of you, for sheer dumb luck and what appears to be remarkable spellwork. She looked at the pipes. "That is remarkable spellwork, Mr. Potter." "Thank you, Professor. I will expect a full explanation of the magical technique involved at your earliest convenience." "Of course." McGonagall left to summon someone who could deal with the troll. Quirrell stood in the doorway, staring at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be terrified and not quite managing to hide the cold calculation beneath it. Harry stared back and felt the turban clasp screaming. Perhaps we should leave the creature to the professors," Quirrell stammered. "Good idea, Professor," Harry said pleasantly, and watched the man flinch. Snape was still in the doorway. He hadn't spoken, but his black eyes were moving between Harry and Quirrell with the focused attention of someone assembling a puzzle. His right trouser leg was torn, and beneath it Harry caught a glimpse of a wound, ragged, deep, the kind of wound you'd get from something with very large teeth. 3-headed, perhaps. Harry filed this away and followed Ron and Hermione out of the ruined bathroom. They made it to the second-floor corridor before Hermione stopped, turned, and threw her arms around Harry hard enough to stagger him. She was shaking. Not the dramatic trembling of someone performing distress but the deep, involuntary shaking of someone who had genuinely believed, for several minutes, that she was about to die. Harry stood very still. Physical affection was not something he had experience with. The Dursleys had never hugged him. Goblins communicated through action and sharp words, not touch. The last person who'd held his hand had been a dying king in an alley. He put his arms around Hermione and held on. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder. "Both of you. Thank you." "Don't mention it," Ron said, standing awkwardly to the side, and then Hermione grabbed him too and pulled him into the hug, and for a moment the 3 of them stood in a damp, bruised huddle in a second-floor corridor and held on to each other because they were 11 and alive and that was enough. When they separated, something had changed. Not dramatically, no oaths were sworn, no declarations made. But the geometry of their friendship had shifted from the casual proximity of people who sat together at meals to something more structural, more load-bearing. They had walked into danger together and come out the other side, and that created a bond that was different from liking or convenience. "So," Ron said as they walked toward Gryffindor Tower. "Iron pipes. Just, ripping out of the walls." "Yes. Is there a limit to that? Like, could you do it with anything metal? Could you do it with, I don't know, a suit of armor? In theory. Could you do it with a cannon?" "Ron. I'm just asking." "The answer is theoretically yes, and you need to stop making that face because it's making me nervous." They reached the portrait of the fat lady, gave the password, and climbed through into the common room, where their arrival was greeted with a hero's welcome that Harry endured and Ron visibly enjoyed and Hermione accepted with the flushed, overwhelmed expression of someone who was not accustomed to being popular. Later, when the common room had emptied and the fire had burned low, Harry sat alone and wrote to Griphook. Quirrell released a troll into the school as a diversion. While the professors dealt with it, he went for the 3rd floor. "I think Snape caught him," Snape's been bitten by something with big teeth, probably the three-headed dog Hagrid mentioned. Quirrell didn't get the stone. I used the gold sense through my wand tonight. Controlled mundane iron. Pipes. It worked, but it hurt afterward. Hermione had the idea, channel goblin magic through the wand instead of the other way around. She's right. It works. I'm going to keep practicing. The troll is fine. Just unconscious. I didn't kill it. Harry, the reply came at breakfast. The fact that you felt the need to specify that you didn't kill the troll concerns me less than the fact that you fought one in the first place. You are the gold tongue. You are irreplaceable. The troll is a troll. Regarding the wand technique, this is unprecedented. No record exists in Goblin archives of a wizard channeling goblin craft through a focus object. The implications are significant. I am sending Cragner to consult. He will arrive at the castle boundary on Saturday. Meet him at the gates at dawn. Tell no one. Regarding Quirrell, the situation is escalating. I have made inquiries through channels you do not need to know about. The entity possessing him is what we suspected. I will not write the name. You know it. Eat more. You're too thin. Griphook Harry folded the letter and ate a second helping of eggs. Across the table, Ron was telling the troll story for the 6th time, each retelling slightly more dramatic than the last. Hermione was correcting factual inaccuracies in real time, which only made the narrative more entertaining. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching Harry with an expression that had been evolving all term, from hostility through confusion to something that looked increasingly like uncertainty. Harry had been waiting for the boy to make a move. Griphook's advice on the Malfoy situation had been characteristically pragmatic: the son is not the father. Give him room to prove it. The room presented itself on Saturday morning. Harry was walking back from his dawn meeting with Cragner at the castle gates, a productive session that had left him with a new forging technique to practice and a headache from the intensity of the old smith's instruction, when he found Draco sitting alone on a bench in the courtyard, staring at a letter in his hands. It was barely 7 in the morning. The courtyard was empty. Frost glittered on the cobblestones, and Draco's breath came in small white clouds. He looked up when Harry approached, and for a moment his face did the Malfoy thing, the automatic sneer, the lifted chin, the mask of contempt. Then it crumbled. My father's pulling me out of school, Draco said. Harry sat on the bench. Not close, not far. Why? Because I haven't. Draco looked at the letter, then at Harry, then at his own shoes. He wanted me to get close to you. To be your friend. To find out how the debt works and whether there's a way to. I don't know. Leverage it, or neutralize it, or something. That's why he sent me to you on the train. I know. You knew. Draco, I know exactly how much your father owes, who he owes it to, and what he'll lose if I decide to call those debts in. Of course I knew he sent you. Draco's hands tightened on the letter. He says I've failed. Says I've spent 2 months achieving nothing and he's not going to waste another term's tuition on. His voice cracked. He clenched his jaw and looked away. Anyway. Thought you should know. Since apparently everything in my life revolves around you now. Harry was quiet for a moment. The gold sense gave him the Malfoy financial picture in perfect detail, the debts, the leveraged properties, the quietly desperate restructuring that Lucius had been doing for the past year. The Malfoys were wealthy by any normal standard, but they were also deeply exposed. Their fortune depended on the stability of the system, and Harry's existence threatened that stability. Do you want to leave? Harry asked. What? Hogwarts. Do you want to leave? Draco looked at him as though he'd spoken Mermish. Of course I don't want to leave. I'm 11. I want to go to school and learn magic and play Quidditch and not have every decision about my life made by. He stopped. Swallowed. No. I don't want to leave. Then don't. My father, Your father's tuition payments come from the Malfoy vault. The Malfoy vault is in Gringotts. Gringotts answers to me. Harry, let that sink in. If I guarantee your tuition directly, your father can't pull funding. You stay at Hogwarts. Draco stared at him. You do that? On one condition. The grey eyes narrowed. Here it comes. Stop performing. Stop being Lucius Malfoy's son and start being Draco Malfoy. I don't need a spy and I don't need a sycophant. But I could use someone in Slytherin who sees clearly and isn't afraid to think for himself. Harry stood. The offer's open. No deadline. Think about it. He started to walk away. Potter. Harry turned. Draco was still sitting on the bench, the letter crumpled in his fist, and his face was doing something complicated, a battle between training and instinct, between the person he'd been shaped to be and the person he might become. Why? Draco asked. After what I said on the train, the things about Weasley, the whole wrong sort rubbish, why would you help me? Because someone helped me once, when he had no reason to. And it changed everything. Harry left Draco sitting in the frost with the crushed letter and a choice to make. It wasn't kindness, exactly, kindness was too simple a word for the calculation behind it. It was an investment. An act of strategic generosity that might pay dividends or might not, and Harry was comfortable with the uncertainty because Griphook had taught him that the best investments were the ones that looked like charity. But beneath the calculation, beneath the strategy, there was something else. Something that had nothing to do with gold or politics or the long game. Harry remembered what it felt like to be small and trapped and told that your worth was determined by someone else's opinion. He wouldn't let that happen to anyone if he could stop it. November brought rain and Quidditch and the slow, grinding escalation of the Quirrell situation. Harry had been given a spot on the Gryffindor team after a flying lesson in which he'd caught Neville Longbottom's Remembrall in a 60-foot dive that made McGonagall clutch her chest and then immediately march him to Oliver Wood's office. He was the youngest Seeker in a century, which generated exactly the kind of attention he didn't want but accepted because the flying itself was extraordinary. The broom answered to his touch with a responsiveness that reminded him of goblin craft, and the freedom of the air was the closest thing to the gold sense he'd found in the physical world. His first match was against Slytherin, on a blustery Saturday that threw rain sideways across the pitch and turned the stands into a sea of umbrellas and warming charms. The whole school turned out. The atmosphere was electric. Harry flew well. He was fast and instinctive and the gold sense gave him an edge nobody expected. The snitch had goblin-forged components, a tiny mechanism inside the golden shell that regulated its flight patterns, and Harry could feel it the way a shark feels electricity in water. He tracked it through the chaos of the game, ignoring the bludgers and the commentary and the roar of the crowd, locked onto that tiny singing point of metal. And then his broom tried to kill him. It started as a shudder, a vibration in the handle that didn't match the wind. Then the broom bucked, hard, and Harry's grip slipped. It bucked again, and he was hanging by one hand, 200 feet above the pitch, the rain hammering his face, and the broom was fighting him with a malicious intelligence that had nothing to do with its construction. Someone was jinxing it. Harry's first instinct was to reach for the gold sense, to command the goblin-forged components in the broom to stabilize. But the broom was only partially goblin-made, the handle was wood, the bristles were natural fiber, and the binding magic was entirely wizardcraft. The goblin components he could feel were the bearings and the altitude regulator, and they were already straining against the jinx, trying to keep him aloft. He was going to fall. The thought arrived with clinical clarity, no panic attached. Griphook had drilled panic out of him at age 7 with a series of increasingly terrifying training exercises that Harry still had nightmares about. So he didn't panic. He assessed. His wand was in his robe, unreachable with one hand on the broom. The gold sense couldn't control enough of the broom to overpower the jinx. The ground was 200 feet below and getting more relevant by the second. The broom bucked again. Harry's fingers slipped. In the stands, Hermione had her omnioculars focused on the teachers' section, scanning faces. She found what she was looking for, Snape, staring fixedly at Harry, his lips moving in a continuous murmur, his eyes unblinking. "He's jinxing the broom," she hissed to Ron. "Snape, look at him," Ron looked. "We have to do something." Hermione was already moving, pushing through the crowd, circling behind the stands toward the professor's section. She had a plan that involved bluebell flames and Snape's robes and a level of reckless bravery that would have made any Gryffindor proud. She never got the chance to execute it. Because Harry, hanging by 5 fingers from a broom 200 feet in the air, did something no one expected. He let go. The crowd screamed. Ron screamed. Hermione, halfway around the stands, screamed. Harry fell. Wind tore at him, rain blinding, the pitch rushing up with the inevitability of gravity doing what gravity does. He spread his arms, not to slow himself but to feel the air, and in the air he felt the metal, every goblin-forged element in the stadium, in the goal posts, in the structural supports of the stands, in the thousands of coins and clasps and buckles carried by 1,000 spectators. He reached for it all. The goal posts bent. 3 massive hoops on each side of the pitch, solid goblin-forged iron, bent inward like fingers closing, and the structural beams beneath the stands groaned and shifted, and a lattice of metal formed in the air beneath Harry, a net, woven in an instant from every piece of goblin craft within reach, catching him 40 feet above the ground in a hammock of iron and gold that rang like a bell when he hit it. The stadium went absolutely silent. Harry lay in his metal net, breathing hard, rain falling on his face. Above him, his broom, freed from the jinx the moment he'd stopped riding it, hovered aimlessly. Below him, the ground waited. He sat up. Looked around. Found the snitch. It was hovering 6 inches from his face, drawn to the massive pulse of goblin magic he'd just released, its tiny wings beating uselessly against the gold scents that held it in place like a fly in amber. Harry plucked it out of the air. The silence held for one more heartbeat. Then Lee Jordan's voice erupted from the commentary box, "Harry Potter has caught the snitch. Gryffindor wins. And can someone please explain what just happened to the goal posts?" The stadium erupted. Harry climbed out of the metal net, which unraveled behind him and returned its components to their original positions with a series of groans and clangs. He landed on the pitch, the snitch still buzzing in his fist, and was immediately buried in a pile of scarlet-robed Gryffindor players who were shouting and crying and pounding his back. Over their shoulders, he looked up at the stands. Dumbledore was on his feet, applauding slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Snape was gone, his seat empty, his expression before departure presumably not one of delight. Quirrell sat in the professor's section with his turban askew, and for just a moment, the stammer and the frightened mouse act dropped, and Harry saw the real face beneath, cold, calculating, hungry. Their eyes met across the length of the pitch. Quirrell smiled. Not the nervous, twitchy smile he wore like a costume. A different smile entirely. The smile of something ancient and patient and utterly without mercy. Harry held the gaze. He didn't smile back. He didn't need to. "I know what you are," he thought. "I know what you want. And when you make your move, I'll be ready." Quirrell looked away first. The Gryffindor celebrations lasted well into the evening. The common room was a chaos of butterbeer and singing and Fred and George Weasley leading increasingly creative chants about Harry's aerial gymnastics. Harry endured it with good humor, accepted congratulations, and eventually extracted himself to a quiet corner where Ron and Hermione were waiting. "It was Snape," Hermione said without preamble. "He was jinxing your broom. I saw his lips moving, maintaining eye contact, classic sustained jinx methodology." "It wasn't Snape," Harry said. "I saw him, Harry." "You saw him performing a counter-jinx." "Snape was trying to keep me on the broom, not throw me off." Harry had felt it during the fall, the gold sense, in the moment of crisis, had expanded to encompass not just metal but the magical currents flowing through the stadium, and he'd felt 2 competing spells locked onto his broom. One was hostile, chaotic, saturated with the same wrongness he felt from Quirrell's turban clasp. The other was controlled, precise, and aimed at neutralizing the first. The jinx was Quirrell's. Or rather, it was whatever is living inside Quirrell. Hermione's face went through rapid recalculations. You're sure? Positive. Then we need to tell Dumbledore. Dumbledore already knows. He's known about Quirrell since before term started. This is part of his plan: let Quirrell make attempts, monitor them, wait for the right moment to act. Harry's voice was even, but something beneath it was less patient than it had been. The problem is that Dumbledore's plan uses the school as a chessboard and the students as pieces. Quirrell released a troll 2 weeks ago that nearly killed Hermione. Today he nearly killed me. Dumbledore's trap is elegant, but it's not safe. So what do we do? Ron asked. Harry looked at his friends: Ron, loyal and brave and angry on his behalf; Hermione, brilliant and fierce and already working the problem. He thought about Dumbledore's trap and Quirrell's patience and the stone pulsing on the 3rd floor and the thing beneath the turban that smiled with someone else's mouth. We prepare, he said. Quirrell will make his move soon. The stone is what he wants, and he's running out of time. Whatever's possessing him is getting stronger, and the body it's wearing is getting weaker. I could feel it today. The magical output during the jinx was enormous. That kind of power burns through a host. How do we prepare for something like that? Ron asked. I've been practicing a new technique with my wand. Goblin magic channeled through the Phoenix core. It's not ready yet, but it's getting there. Harry paused. Ron, I need you to keep playing chess. What? The protections around the stone, Dumbledore designed them as challenges. I can feel the goblin-forged components, but there are other layers I can't read. One of them feels like a strategy puzzle. A game. And you think it's chess? I think you're the best chess player I've ever met, and if we end up facing a chess challenge, I want you ready. Ron sat up straighter. Something shifted in his face, the casual, self-deprecating kid replaced, for a moment, by someone sharper and more serious. I'll be ready. Hermione, I need you to research the Philosopher's Stone. Everything you can find, its properties, its defenses, its weaknesses. If Dumbledore built protections for it, there will be a logic puzzle in there. That's your territory. Hermione nodded. She already had her determined face on, the one that meant libraries were about to be raided. And what are you going to do? Ron asked. Harry looked at his hands. He thought about the iron sphere he'd forged with a wand. About the goal posts bending at his will. About the vast, singing network of gold that connected him to every corner of the wizarding world. I'm going to figure out how to fight a dark wizard with goblin magic, he said. Because when Quirrell goes for the stone, I'm going to be there. And whatever's hiding under that turban is going to learn what happens when you threaten the people I care about. The fire crackled. The celebrations continued around them, oblivious, joyful. Harry sat with his friends and planned for war. December brought snow and exams and a letter from Lucius Malfoy. It arrived not by owl but by ministry courier, a pompous little man in a bowler hat who delivered it to Harry at breakfast with the smug satisfaction of someone delivering a subpoena. The letter was written on expensive parchment in an elegant hand, and it was, beneath its polished surface, a declaration of war. Dear Mr. Potter, I write to you not as an adversary but as a concerned member of the wizarding community. Your presence at Hogwarts, while no doubt educational, has created considerable unease among the families whose children attend alongside you. The incident at the Quidditch match, during which you caused significant structural damage to school property, has raised serious questions about the safety of an individual with your particular abilities, residing in close proximity to minors. I have therefore taken the liberty of drafting a petition to the Board of Governors, of which I am a member, requesting a formal review of your enrollment. I trust you will understand that this is not personal but a matter of institutional responsibility. Additionally, I note that my son Draco's tuition has been guaranteed by an external party without my consent. I consider this an interference in my family's private affairs and request that it be reversed immediately. Yours sincerely, Lucius Malfoy. Harry read the letter, folded it neatly, and looked across the great hall to the Slytherin table, where Draco was eating breakfast with the rigid posture of someone expecting a blow. Their eyes met. Draco's jaw tightened, and he gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. I didn't know about this. Harry believed him. The gold sense confirmed it. The Malfoy vault records showed that Lucius had made the petition to the Board of Governors 3 days ago, without consulting anyone, including his wife. It was a power play, desperate and ill-considered, born from the same fear that had driven the Ministry's earlier attempt. Harry pulled out a quill and wrote his reply on the back of the letter. Dear Mr. Malfoy, thank you for your letter. I note your concerns and address them as follows. The structural damage to the Quidditch pitch was repaired within seconds at no cost to the school. Your petition to the Board of Governors is, of course, your right. I would simply note that 6 of the 12 governors hold vaults at Gringotts whose contents I can enumerate from memory, and that the 7th, you, is currently carrying debts that, if called in, would require the liquidation of Malfoy Manor. Your son's tuition guarantee stands. Draco is a capable student and deserves an education free from the consequences of his father's political miscalculations. If you wish to discuss this further, I am available during the Christmas holiday. I suggest Gringotts as a neutral venue. The goblins make excellent tea. Happy Christmas, Harry Potter. Gold tongue. He gave the letter to the Ministry courier, who took it with considerably less smugness than he'd arrived with, and went back to his eggs. Who was that from? Ron asked through a mouthful of sausage. Draco's father. He wants me expelled. What? It won't work. He doesn't have the votes and he can't afford the consequences. Harry poured himself more pumpkin juice. But it means the political pressure is escalating. The pureblood families are getting organized. Hermione leaned in, lowering her voice. Harry, you can't just threaten to liquidate people's estates every time someone challenges you. Even if you can. I didn't threaten. I reminded him of the facts. There's a difference. That is exactly what someone who's threatening would say. Harry paused, toast halfway to his mouth. He looked at Hermione, really looked, the way he'd learned to look when someone was telling him something important that he didn't want to hear. You think I'm becoming the thing they're afraid of, he said. I think you have a hammer, and everything is starting to look like a nail. The gold sense is extraordinary, Harry, but you can't solve every problem by reminding people that you control their money. Eventually someone will call your bluff. It's not a bluff. That's what makes it dangerous. If it were a bluff, it wouldn't matter. The fact that you could actually collapse the Malfoy fortune, the fact that you could crash the entire wizarding economy on a whim, that's what scares people. And scared people do stupid, desperate things. The toast had gone cold in his hand. Harry set it down. She was right. He knew she was right the way he knew the gold sense was real, not because someone had told him, but because he could feel the truth of it resonating in his bones. He'd been operating for 6 years with the assumption that power, clearly demonstrated, would keep enemies at bay. It was a goblin philosophy, born from a race that had spent millennia defending its treasures against stronger adversaries. Strength as deterrence. Gold as armor. But armor was for defense, and what Harry had been doing, the casual displays of omniscience, the financial threats, the quiet flexing of economic muscle, wasn't defense. It was provocation. And Hermione, who had no gold sense and no goblin training and no power over anyone's vault, could see it more clearly than he could because she was standing outside the system looking in. What would you suggest? He asked. Talk to people. Not from a position of power, from a position of honesty. Lucius Malfoy is afraid because he thinks you'll ruin him. So tell him you won't. Not as a threat, as a promise. Stop negotiating and start communicating. Goblins don't communicate. They negotiate. You're not a goblin, Harry. There it was. The simple, undeniable truth that sat at the center of everything. He was the gold tongue, yes. He was raised by goblins. He carried goblin magic in his blood. But he was also a boy who'd shared his bread with a dying stranger, and the reason Ragnarok had chosen him wasn't his strength or his potential or his famous scar. It was his kindness. Harry looked at Hermione and felt something shift inside him, not the gold sense, not magic, but something more fundamental. A recalibration. A reminder of who he was before the power, before the politics, before the weight of every vault in Britain settled onto his shoulders. "You're right," he said. "I'll write to Lucius again. A real letter this time. No threats." Hermione smiled. "Good. You're still terrifying, though." "Thank you." That wasn't a compliment. It absolutely was. Harry wrote the second letter that evening. It took him 3 hours and 6 drafts, and it was the hardest thing he'd written in his life, because it required him to do something that neither goblin training nor Dursley survival had prepared him for: be vulnerable. "Mr. Malfoy, my earlier letter was unkind. I apologize. I understand your fear. You have built your family's position over generations, and my existence threatens everything you've worked for. That fear is rational and I don't dismiss it. I want you to know that I have no intention of using the debt of gold as a weapon against any family. Not yours, not anyone's. The power I hold was given to me by a dying goblin who saw kindness in a child, and I refuse to turn that gift into something cruel. Your son is a good person trying to find his way under impossible pressure. I know what that's like. I would consider it a privilege to be his friend, if he'll have me, and I ask that you give him the space to make that choice himself. I don't expect you to trust me. Trust is earned, and I haven't earned yours yet. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to let me. Sincerely, Harry Potter." He sent it with Hedwig and didn't receive a reply. But 2 days later, Draco walked up to him in the courtyard, handed him a folded note, and walked away without speaking. The note said, in Draco's precise handwriting, "Father withdrew the petition. I'm staying. Don't make me regret this, Potter." Harry smiled and put the note in his pocket next to Griphook's coin. The Christmas holiday arrived. Most students went home. Ron's family went to Romania to visit his brother Charlie, and Hermione went home to her parents, and Harry, who could have gone to Gringotts, could have gone anywhere in the world, chose to stay at Hogwarts. He stayed because the castle at Christmas was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Snow covered the grounds, the enchanted ceiling in the great hall reflected a sky of soft white, and the goblin-forged elements in the walls hummed with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. He stayed because the third-floor corridor was pulsing louder every day, and Quirrell was getting bolder, and the thing beneath the turban was growing impatient. And he stayed because on Christmas morning, he found a package at the foot of his bed wrapped in silver paper, and inside it was a cloak that shimmered like water made of moonlight. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." No signature. But the handwriting was Dumbledore's, and the gesture, personal, generous, laced with guilt, was exactly the kind of thing a complicated old man might do when he was trying to earn back trust he'd squandered. Harry held the invisibility cloak in his hands and felt something he hadn't expected. Not the gold sense. The cloak was woven from something beyond goblin craft, something older and stranger that made his awareness slide off it like water off glass. What he felt was his father. Not literally, there was no ghost, no echo, no magical residue. But the knowledge that James Potter had worn this cloak, had held it in these same hands, had passed it to Dumbledore for safekeeping before the night everything ended, that knowledge was a kind of warmth that no fire could provide. He put on the cloak and vanished. Not just from sight, the gold sense confirmed that he was genuinely undetectable, invisible to every form of perception, magical and mundane. The cloak didn't just hide him. It removed him from the world entirely. The power of it was staggering. And the first thing Harry did with it, the very first thing, was walk to the Ollery and send a letter. Griphook. Dumbledore returned my father's invisibility cloak. It's not goblin forged, it's something else entirely. I can't read it with the gold sense. What is it? The reply came Boxing Day. 1 of 3. The Deathly Hallows. Your father's cloak is the cloak of invisibility, made by Death himself, or so the legend goes. The goblins have our own name for it, the absent thing. It cannot be forged, cannot be copied, cannot be detected by any craft, goblin or wizard. If Dumbledore has given you this, he is either beginning to trust you or more actions continue. Chapter 4, The Crown Beneath the Skin. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in the second week of January, carried by a Gringotts owl that was blacker than the night it flew through and meaner than anything in the Ollery. It dropped the envelope on Harry's breakfast plate, took a strip of bacon from Ron's hand without permission, and left. Harry opened it under the table. Gold tongue. The protections are failing. Our wards report 3 breaches in the outer layers over the past week. Someone is systematically dismantling the non-goblin defenses. The goblin-forged locks remain intact but isolated. When the surrounding protections fall, the locks alone will not hold. Dumbledore left the castle last night. Ministry summons, urgent Wisengamot session regarding the regulation of non-human magical authorities. The timing is not coincidental. Someone engineered his absence. If the possessed one moves tonight, there will be nothing between him and the stone except our locks and whatever you bring. I cannot enter the castle grounds without ministry authorization. I have requested it. It will be denied. You know what to do. Griphook. Harry read the letter twice. Then he folded it, tucked it into his robe, and looked at Ron and Hermione. Tonight, he said. Ron set down his fork. Hermione closed her book. Neither asked what he meant. They'd been waiting for this, preparing for it, since Halloween. The chess sets Ron had been studying, the logic puzzles Hermione had been solving, the hours Harry had spent in his 5th-floor classroom forging the gold sense into something that could fight. All of it had been leading here. How do you know? Hermione asked. Dumbledore's gone. Called away by the ministry, fake emergency, almost certainly. Quirrell's been dismantling the protections for weeks and the outer layers are nearly gone. If he doesn't move tonight, he'll never get a better chance. And if he does move tonight, Ron said slowly, we'll be there. You don't have to be. Either of you. This is my fight. Shut up, Harry, Ron said. Honestly, Hermione agreed. We've been over this. Harry looked at them, his friends, his first friends, the people who'd walked into danger beside him without being asked and would do it again tonight without hesitation. Ron, who'd thrown a rock at a troll because Harry told him to. Hermione, who'd looked at the most powerful 11-year-old in the wizarding world and told him he was wrong. They were extraordinary, both of them, and not because of anything magical. After dinner, Harry said. I'll bring the cloak. We go together. The day crawled. Classes passed in a blur, transfiguration, herbology, history of magic, and Harry sat through all of them with the gold sense turned up to maximum, monitoring the 3rd-floor corridor, feeling the protections pulse and weaken and hold and weaken again. The goblin-forged locks were solid. Everything else was eroding like sand in a tide. He tracked Quirrell through the day by the screaming of the turban clasp. Morning, the data classroom, teaching a lesson on defensive jinxes with that absurd stammer. Afternoon, his office, door locked, magical energy spiking in patterns that suggested he was working on something intensive, testing spells, practicing, preparing. Evening, the great hall for dinner, sitting at the high table in his usual seat, eating nothing, eyes flicking to the staff table where Dumbledore's chair sat empty. At the high table, Snape was watching Quirrell with the focused intensity of a hawk tracking a mouse. Harry caught Snape's eye across the hall. Something passed between them, not warmth, not even alliance, but a shared understanding. Snape knew. He'd probably known longer than Harry. And whatever complicated, bitter history existed between Severus Snape and the Potter family, the man was not going to let Voldemort take the stone without a fight. Harry gave Snape an almost imperceptible nod. Snape's expression didn't change, but one hand moved slightly beneath the table, toward his wand, a gesture that said I'm ready. Good. Another piece on the board. Dinner ended. Students filtered back to their common rooms. Harry climbed the stairs to Gryffindor Tower with Ron and Hermione, and they sat in the common room and waited for it to empty. Neville was the last to leave, and he lingered by the fire with the uncertain expression of someone who sensed something was wrong but couldn't identify what. You three are up to something, Neville said. Harry liked Neville. The boy was gentle and nervous and underestimated by everyone, including himself, and there was a core of steel beneath the softness that reminded Harry of the iron he practiced with, unimpressive on the surface, transformative under pressure. We are, Harry said, because lying to Neville felt wrong. And I need you to stay here. Why? Because if we're not back by morning, someone needs to tell McGonagall what happened. And I trust you to do that. Neville straightened. Something in his round face firmed, the way clay firms when you apply heat. All right. But if you're not back by morning, I'm coming after you. Fair enough. Neville went to bed. The common room was empty. Harry pulled the invisibility cloak from inside his robe, he'd been carrying it all day, a cool weight against his chest, and shook it out. It shimmered in the firelight, liquid silver, the fabric of absence itself. That's incredible, Ron breathed. Stay close. It'll cover all three of us if we keep tight. They draped the cloak over themselves and slipped through the portrait hole. The fat lady snored in her frame, oblivious. The corridors of Hogwarts at midnight were long and dark and full of the small sounds of an ancient building settling, creaks, groans, the distant murmur of portraits talking in their sleep. Harry led them by gold sense, navigating around Filch's patrol route. The man's keyring was goblin forged, centuries old, and sang his position to Harry like a beacon, and past Mrs. Norris, whose collar buckle was equally trackable. They reached the third-floor corridor in 12 minutes. Harry felt the protections immediately, the goblin-forged locks blazing in his awareness, still holding, the surrounding wards tattered and flickering. Quirrell had been here recently. The residue of his magic lingered in the air like a stain, and beneath it, something else, something darker, colder, a magical signature that made the scar on Harry's forehead prickle with a distant, ugly heat. The door at the end of the corridor was massive and old, reinforced with iron bands. Behind it, something was breathing. That's the three-headed dog, Harry said. Hagrid's. Its name is Fluffy. Its name is Fluffy. Ron said. Hagrid has a unique relationship with dangerous creatures. Harry put his hand on the door. The iron bands recognized him instantly, goblin-forged, old, responsive. The lock clicked open without him asking. Music puts it to sleep. That's the first layer of protection. He pushed the door open. Fluffy filled the room. 3 massive heads, each one capable of swallowing a first-year whole, each one equipped with teeth the size of carving knives. The dog was awake, alert, and all 6 eyes locked onto the doorway with the focused hunger of a predator that had been chained in a small room for too long. Then it smelled Harry. All 3 noses twitched simultaneously, and the growling stopped, and the 6 eyes went from predatory to confused to something almost deferential. The great beast lowered its heads, one after another, until all 3 chins rested on the floor. How? Hermione started. The chain is goblin forged. Harry pointed to the massive chain attached to the dog's collar, thick links of dark metal, ancient, powerful. Fluffy responds to whoever the chain recognizes as its master. Right now, that's me. He walked past the dog. Fluffy watched him go with 6 adoring eyes and a thumping tail that shook dust from the ceiling. Ron and Hermione followed quickly, trying not to look at the teeth. Beneath the dog's feet was a trapdoor. Harry felt for it with the gold sense. The hinges were goblin forged, the lock mechanism intricate and beautiful. He touched it and it opened, revealing a shaft of darkness below. Down. Ron said. Down. They dropped through the trapdoor and landed on something soft. Not soft like pillows, soft like a living thing, yielding and slightly damp, with tendrils that immediately began to wind around their ankles. Devil's snare, Hermione said, her voice admirably calm for someone being grabbed by a sentient plant. Don't struggle. It tightens when you resist. Great, so we just let it strangle us calmly, Ron said, already struggling. Relax. It releases you if you relax, Ron, stop moving, it hates heat and light. Harry raised his wand and pushed the gold sense through it. Not a spell, a pulse, a wave of golden warmth that spread through the chamber like sunrise compressed into a second. The devil's snare recoiled as though scalded, tendrils whipping back, and the three of them fell through the loosened mass onto a stone floor below. That wasn't fire, Hermione said, picking herself up. No. Goblin-forged heat. It's what they use in the furnaces. You can just emit furnace heat from your wand. Apparently. They were in a passageway, damp stone walls, a distant sound of rustling and clinking, air that smelled of old earth and something metallic. Harry felt the protections ahead, each one a distinct layer, the goblin locks interspersed with wizard-crafted challenges, the two systems interlocking like the teeth of a zipper. The next chamber was enormous, a vaulted ceiling soaring into darkness, and filling the air between floor and ceiling were hundreds of small, glittering, winged objects that swooped and darted like a flock of crazed starlings. Keys, Hermione said. Winged keys. We need to find the right one for that door. She pointed to a heavy wooden door on the far side of the chamber, with a large iron lock. Ron was looking at the broomsticks propped against the wall, 3 of them, old and battered. We fly up and catch the right key. Harry was already reaching out with the gold sense. Every key in the chamber lit up in his awareness, small, intricate, each one forged with goblin precision. He felt their individual structures, their sizes, their shapes. And he felt the lock on the door, its internal mechanisms laid bare to his perception like a blueprint. The key is old, with a bent wing, he said. Large, silver, probably damaged from being caught before. He scanned the flock and found it instantly, near the top of the chamber, moving slower than the others, one wing crumpled. There. He raised his wand and called it. The key dove out of the flock like a stooping falcon, dropping straight into his outstretched hand. It struggled for a moment, wings buzzing, then went still, recognizing the gold tongue's authority, because even this small piece of goblin craft answered to the debt. Or we could do that, Ron said. Harry unlocked the door and they stepped through into a room that made Ron stop dead. It was a chessboard. A massive, life-size chessboard, stretching the width of the chamber, with pieces that stood as tall as adults, black on the near side, white on the far. The pieces were stone, carved with brutal precision, armed with real weapons. The White King's sword was goblin-forged, and Harry could feel it humming with the potential for violence. This is McGonagall's, Ron said. His voice had changed, lower, focused, the casual kid replaced by the strategist Harry had glimpsed in the courtyard before Christmas. Ron walked to the edge of the board and studied it, his eyes moving across the pieces with the rapid, systematic analysis of someone who spoke the language of chess the way Harry spoke the language of gold. We have to play our way across, Ron said. We take the places of 3 black pieces. The white side plays itself. He was quiet for a moment, mapping the board, calculating lines and possibilities. Harry, you're the bishop. Hermione, take the rook on the far side. I'm the knight. Ron, Hermione started. I can see the game. 17 moves. The white side has a weakness, the queen is aggressive but overextended. If I sacrifice the right pieces in the right order, I can create an opening. Sacrifice, Harry repeated. Ron met his eyes. Not you. Not Hermione. I know where the danger is, and I know how to avoid it. But I need you to trust me. Harry looked at the chessboard. He could feel the goblin-forged sword in the White King's hand, the enchantments that animated the pieces, the lethal intent woven into the game's design. McGonagall had built this to be dangerous. Real danger, not the training wheels kind. He looked at Ron and saw the same thing Ragnarok had seen in Harry in a dark alley, not power, but purpose. "I trust you," Harry said. "Lead." Ron led. The game was brutal and beautiful. Ron directed the black pieces with a precision that bordered on clairvoyance, his voice steady, his commands clear. The white pieces moved in response, ruthless, intelligent, adapting to Ron's strategy with the cold efficiency of a grandmaster algorithm. Pieces were taken on both sides, crashing to the floor in explosions of stone, and the chamber filled with dust and the crack of breaking marble. Harry and Hermione moved when Ron told them to move, stood where Ron told them to stand. Harry could have used the gold sense to intervene, he could feel the goblin-forged sword and the enchantments that drove the pieces, and a focused push might have frozen the game entirely. But this was Ron's domain. Ron's gift. And part of what Harry had learned this year, part of what Hermione had taught him in a destroyed bathroom, what the Sorting Hat had told him in the dark beneath its brim, was that strength wasn't just about what you could do yourself. It was about trusting others to do what you couldn't. So he watched Ron play the most important game of his life, and he kept his gold sense leashed, and he trusted. On the 14th move, Ron paused. His face was tight, sweat beading on his forehead, and Harry could see him running calculations, mapping possibilities, finding the solution and not liking it. "There's only one way," Ron said quietly. "I need to move here." He pointed to a square directly in the path of the White Queen. "She'll take me. When she does, Harry, you move to E3. That's checkmate." "Ron, no," Hermione said. She'll knock me out. These pieces aren't designed to kill, McGonagall wouldn't build that. She'll hit me and I'll go down, and then Harry takes the king." Ron looked at Harry. "I've run it 6 times in my head. This is the only line." Harry's hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the effort of keeping the gold sense restrained, of not reaching out and seizing control of every piece on the board and ending this his way. He could do it. He knew he could do it. One push and the game was over and Ron was safe and nobody had to sacrifice anything. But Ron was looking at him with eyes that said let me do this, and Harry remembered what it felt like to be small and helpless and never allowed to choose anything for yourself. "Make the move," Harry said. Ron stepped forward. The White Queen swiveled toward him, massive and merciless, her stone arm drawing back. Ron didn't flinch. The blow caught him across the side of the head. He went down hard, sliding across the marble floor, and lay still. "Ron!" Hermione lunged toward him. "Hermione, stay on your square." Harry's voice cracked through the chamber. She froze, tears on her face, fists clenched. "He's breathing. I can see his chest moving. We finish this and then we help him." He stepped to E3. Looked up at the White King. The great stone figure trembled, and its goblin-forged sword fell from its hand with a clang that echoed through the chamber, and the crown on its head cracked, and the game was over. Hermione was at Ron's side in 3 steps. "He's unconscious. Concussion, probably. We need to get him out, take him back," Harry said. "Get him to the hospital wing. And leave you alone. The next rooms are mine. Whatever's ahead, it's about the stone, and the stone is about me." Harry knelt beside Ron and put his hand on the boy's chest. He could feel Ron's heartbeat, steady, strong. Not through the gold sense, because Ron wasn't metal. Through touch. Through the simple human act of pressing your palm against a friend's chest and feeling them alive. "He was brilliant," Harry said. "Tell him that when he wakes up." "Harry, I don't want, I know. Neither do I. But this is how it has to be." Hermione looked at him with tears streaming down her face and an expression that combined terror and fury and something else, faith, maybe, or the particular heartbreak of understanding someone well enough to know that arguing was pointless. "Come back," she said. "Promise me." "I promise." She levitated Ron with a charm that was remarkably steady for someone crying, and guided his floating body back toward the chessboard door. At the threshold, she turned. "Harry. Whatever's under that turban, whatever you're about to face, remember that you're not just the gold tongue. You're our friend. That matters more than all of it." She left. The door closed behind her. Harry stood alone in the ruined chessboard chamber, surrounded by broken stone and silence, and let the gold sense expand. He felt the castle above him, every goblin-forged element singing in recognition, the vast network of metal and magic that was Hogwarts responding to his presence like a body responding to a heartbeat. He felt the vaults beneath London, distant but reachable, the immense weight of the wizarding world's accumulated wealth answering to his blood. He felt the ring on the chain around his neck, the first thing he'd ever forged, warm against his skin. And ahead of him, through the next door, he felt the stone. Not goblin-forged, something else entirely, alchemical, ancient, but wrapped in goblin protections that blazed with recognition. The locks knew him. They were waiting for him. They wanted to open. And beyond the stone, he felt Quirrell. Or rather, he felt the thing that lived inside Quirrell, a presence that distorted the gold sense the way a black hole distorts light, pulling everything toward it, consuming, hungry. Harry drew his wand. The Hollywood was warm, the phoenix core humming in resonance with the goblin magic in his blood. He held the wand the way Griphook had taught him to hold a goblin blade, firm, balanced, an extension of intent rather than a tool. He walked through the door. The next chamber held a troll. Larger than the one at Halloween, much larger, and even more unpleasant. It was unconscious, sprawled across the floor in a heap of grey flesh and stench, already dealt with. Quirrell had been through here. Harry stepped over the troll's outstretched arm and moved on. The chamber after that held a table with 7 bottles and a roll of parchment. A logic puzzle, Hermione's territory. Harry read the parchment quickly. Flames sprang up in the doorways ahead and behind, one set purple, one set black. The riddle was clever, designed to separate the logical from the magical, and Harry solved it in 2 minutes because Griphook had drilled him in exactly this kind of analytical reasoning since he was 6 years old. The smallest bottle held the potion that would get him through the black flames and forward. There was barely a swallow. He drank it, ice sliding down his throat, and walked through the fire. The last chamber was different from the others. It was large and circular, with pillars of dark stone arranged in a ring, and in the center of the room stood a mirror. Harry knew the mirror. He'd encountered it once before, during the Christmas holiday, an accidental discovery during a late-night walk under the cloak. The mirror of Eriste, which showed the viewer their deepest desire. Harry had looked into it and seen his parents, and it had nearly broken him, and he'd walked away and never gone back. The mirror stood in the center of the room, and in front of it stood Quirrell. The turban was gone. Without it, Quirrell looked smaller, diminished, like a puppet with its strings cut. His head was bare and the back of it was wrong. Something pressed against the skin from the inside, distending it, reshaping it into features that weren't Quirrell's. A face. Flattened, distorted, with slits for nostrils and eyes that burned red even through the stretched skin. Quirrell was staring into the mirror with the frantic intensity of someone searching for something they couldn't find. His hands clawed at the glass, his breathing ragged. The face on the back of his head was speaking, a low, constant murmur in a voice that sounded like it had been scraped off the inside of a grave. "The stone is in the mirror," Quirrell muttered, answering the voice. "I can see myself presenting it to you, master, but I can't, I don't know how to get it out, use the boy," the voice whispered. Cold. Patient. Hungry. Quirrell spun. He saw Harry standing in the doorway, and his expression cycled through surprise, fear, and a settling resignation. "P. Potter," he said. The stammer was back, but it was reflexive now, empty of any real attempt at deception. Of course. I should have known you'd come. You did know, Harry said. That's why you got Dumbledore out of the castle. You knew I'd sense the weakening protections and come to investigate. Quirrell's mouth twisted. Clever boy. You've been clever all year, too clever for an 11-year-old. The goblins taught you well. They did. Let me see him, the voice whispered from the back of Quirrell's head. Turn around. Quirrell obeyed, rotating slowly until the face on the back of his skull was pointing directly at Harry. The red eyes focused, bright, intelligent, burning with a malice that was centuries old and utterly personal. Harry Potter, said Lord Voldemort. We meet again. The scar on Harry's forehead erupted. Not pain, exactly, or not only pain. The gold sense screamed in response, the two forces colliding in his skull like cymbals, and for a moment his vision whited out and the world was nothing but noise. He breathed through it. The way Griphook had taught him. You are not drowning. You are the ocean. The pain receded. The gold sense stabilized. Harry opened his eyes and looked at the face of the man who had killed his parents. You're smaller than I expected, Harry said. The red eyes narrowed. And you are more interesting than I expected. The goblin's pet, they call you. The gold tongue. The child who holds the keys to every vault in Britain. The lipless mouth smiled. I have been watching you all year, Harry Potter. Through Quirrell's eyes. Every conversation, every demonstration of power, every casual reminder to the world that you could break them with a thought. Then you know what I can do. I know what you think you can do. I know the debt of gold is powerful, I have studied it, in my years of wandering, more thoroughly than any wizard alive. But I also know its limitations. The debt gives you dominion over goblin-crafted gold. It does not make you a warrior. It does not make you wise. And it does not protect you from the killing curse. Harry's grip tightened on his wand. The gold sense was churning, agitated, every piece of goblin-forged metal in the chamber resonating with his tension. The pillars had goblin-forged cores. The mirror's frame was laced with goblin craft. Even the floor beneath his feet had veins of forged metal running through it. What do you want? Harry asked. The stone. Obviously. The Philosopher's Stone will give me a body of my own, flesh and blood and power, not this parasitic half-life. Voldemort's red eyes burned. But the mirror won't give it to me. Dumbledore's final protection, the stone can only be retrieved by someone who wants it but doesn't want to use it. A charming bit of magic. Very much his style. So you need me. I need you to look in the mirror. The stone will reveal itself to you because you don't desire its power. You are already the wealthiest wizard alive, the elixir of life is meaningless to someone who holds the debt of gold. Harry didn't move. The gold sense was giving him information, fast and dense, the structural composition of the mirror, the goblin-forged elements in its frame, the magical currents flowing through it. And beneath all of that, something else. The stone itself, embedded in the mirror's enchantment, waiting. And if I refuse? Voldemort's smile widened. Then I take the debt from you. Yes, Harry, I know it can be done. Not easily, not cleanly, but the debt of gold, like all magical compacts, is anchored to life force. If I consume your life force, a process I am intimately familiar with, the debt transfers to me. Not as a gift, as Ragnarok gave it, but as a conquest. The chamber went cold. Not metaphorically, the temperature actually dropped, frost crawling across the stone floor, Harry's breath coming in white plumes. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was radiating a magical pressure that pushed against the gold sense like a hand pressing on his chest. You can't take it, Harry said. The debt is absolute. It was designed to be untransferable. It was designed by goblins. Brilliant craftsmen, yes. Cunning negotiators, certainly. But goblins do not understand the magic of the soul. They do not understand Horcruxes. They do not understand what it means to split yourself into pieces and scatter those pieces across the world so that death itself cannot hold you. The red eyes blazed. I have broken every law of magic that wizards hold sacred. Do you really believe a goblin contract will stop me? Harry felt the truth in the words, not because Voldemort was right, but because Voldemort believed he was right, and that belief was backed by decades of impossible magical achievement. This was not a bluff. This was not a politician's threat or a schoolyard bully's bluster. This was a declaration of intent from someone who had literally conquered death. There's a third option, Harry said. The red eyes flickered. Oh. Harry raised his wand. Not pointing it at Quirrell, pointing it at the mirror. I take the stone and destroy it. Silence. Complete, ringing silence. You wouldn't, Voldemort whispered. The stone is a piece of alchemy. Advanced, brilliant, but ultimately it's a crafted object. I can feel the goblin-forged elements in the mirror's frame, they're part of the retrieval mechanism. If I command them to release the stone into my hand and then channel the forge fire through my wand, I can reduce it to slag in about 3 seconds. If you destroy the stone, Nicholas Flamel dies. Flamel is 600 years old. He's had a good run. You would kill a man to spite me. I would remove a resource that an immortal dark wizard wants to use to build himself a new body. The calculus isn't complicated. The temperature dropped further. The frost was climbing the pillars now, and the air between Harry and Quirrell/Voldemort crackled with competing magical pressures, the gold sense pushing outward, Voldemort's dark magic pushing inward, the chamber itself groaning under the strain. You are bluffing, Voldemort said. You are an 11-year-old child playing at power. You will not, Harry looked into the mirror of Eriste. He didn't want to. He knew what it had shown him before, his parents, alive, smiling, whole, and he knew that image would gut him. But the stone was in the mirror, and the mirror needed him to look, and sometimes courage wasn't about being unafraid. Sometimes it was about being afraid and doing it anyway because the people you loved were counting on you. The mirror showed him his reflection. But not just his reflection, a version of himself that stood straighter, older, wearing the ring he'd forged on a chain around his neck. Behind this older Harry stood 2 figures, a man with messy black hair and glasses, a woman with red hair and green eyes. His parents. They were smiling. Not the desperate, reaching smiles of the dead longing for the living, but the calm, proud smiles of people who had done their part and trusted their son to do his. The older Harry in the mirror reached into his pocket, pulled out a blood-red stone the size of a small egg, and winked. Harry felt a weight appear in his real pocket. Heavy, warm, pulsing with alchemical energy that the gold sense couldn't read but the wand could feel. The stone was his. Give it to me, Voldemort hissed. Harry turned from the mirror. The stone was in his pocket. His wand was in his hand. And between him and the door stood a possessed professor carrying the fragmented soul of the most dangerous dark wizard in history. No, Harry said. Quirrell lunged. Not with a wand, with his bare hands. The move was graceless, desperate, driven by Voldemort's screaming command. Quirrell's fingers closed around Harry's throat, and the moment they touched his skin, 2 things happened simultaneously. Quirrell screamed. His hands blistered, great white welts erupting across his palms and fingers, the flesh literally burning at the point of contact. The blood wards. Lily Potter's sacrifice, still alive in Harry's blood, still lethal to the thing that had killed her. And Harry's gold sense detonated. The contact, physical contact with the fragment of Voldemort's soul, triggered something in the debt of gold that Harry hadn't known existed. The goblin magic in his blood recognized the dark magic in Quirrell's touch the way an immune system recognizes a virus, and it responded with overwhelming force. Gold light erupted from Harry's skin. Not the gentle warmth of the forging exercises or the controlled pulse he'd used against the devil's snare, a tsunami, a supernova, a wall of golden fire that exploded outward from his body in every direction. The pillars in the chamber rang like bells. The mirror cracked. The floor split. And Quirrell came apart. Not violently. Not bloodily. The gold light washed over him and the dark magic that held Voldemort's soul fragment to Quirrell's body simply dissolved. Like rust in acid. Like shadow in sunlight. The debt of gold was designed to protect goblin wealth from all threats, and Voldemort's parasitic soul magic registered as the ultimate threat, a force that consumed, that took without giving, that turned everything it touched into a resource for its own survival. The gold sense burned it away. Quirrell collapsed. The man hit the floor and didn't move, and from the place where the face had been on the back of his skull, something emerged, a dark, vaporous shape, barely visible, screaming in a frequency that Harry felt in his scar rather than heard with his ears. Voldemort's wraith. Disembodied. Formless. Burning with rage and pain and a hunger that had been building for 10 years. It hung in the air above Quirrell's body and turned toward Harry, and the red eyes, no longer physical, now just points of crimson light in the dark cloud, fixed on him with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "This is not over," the wraith whispered. The voice was fading, fraying at the edges, losing coherence. "The debt of gold cannot protect you forever. I will return. I will find a way. And when I do, I will take everything you hold dear, your gold, your goblins, your pitiful friends, and I will make you watch as I burn it all." Harry stood in the golden light of the debt, the stone in his pocket, his wand in his hand, his scar blazing, and looked at the fading remnant of the monster who had murdered his parents. "You killed my mother," he said. "She was 21 years old and she stood between you and my crib and she didn't move. You killed my father. He was 21 years old and he tried to fight you without a wand to buy her time to run." His voice was steady. The gold sense was steady. Everything was steady except his heart, which was breaking and burning and beating all at once. "You destroyed my family and you left me in a cupboard and I grew up thinking I was worthless, and the first person who ever showed me kindness was a dying goblin in an alley who had more compassion in his last breath than you have in your entire fractured soul." The wraith writhed. The red eyes dimmed. "I'm not afraid of you," Harry said. "I'm 11 years old and I hold the debt of gold and I have friends who love me and I am not afraid. Come back when you're ready. Come back with whatever body you build and whatever army you raise. I'll be here. And I'll have more than gold waiting for you." The wraith screamed, a final, shattering sound that cracked the remaining glass in the mirror and sent shards scattering across the floor, and then it fled. Up through the ceiling, through the stone and the metal and the ancient bones of the castle, out into the night. Gone. Not dead, Harry could feel that much. The wraith was not dead because Voldemort had done something to himself, something that made true death impossible. "Horcruxes," the wraith had said. "Split yourself into pieces." Harry filed this away in the place where he kept the most important and dangerous information, the place that was protected by goblin-forged occlumency and reinforced by 6 years of training and the absolute certainty that this knowledge would matter more than almost anything else in the years to come. Then he looked down at Quirrell. The man was alive. Barely. The dissolution of Voldemort's soul fragment had left him broken, his skin gray, his breathing shallow, his magical core flickering like a candle in a draft. Harry knelt beside him and felt for a pulse. It was there, thin and thready. "I know you can hear me," Harry said. "You made choices that brought you here. But you were also a victim, possessed, controlled, used up. The goblins have healers who understand dark magic better than anyone at St. Mungo's. I can get you help." Quirrell's eyes opened. They were brown. Just brown, no red, no darkness, no borrowed malice. The eyes of a man who had gone looking for power in the wrong forest and found something that ate him alive. "I'm sorry," Quirrell whispered. No stutter. "I was so afraid." "I know," Harry said. "Help is coming." He pressed Griphook's coin and spoke the goblin's name. 30 seconds later, far faster than should have been possible, given the castle's anti-apparition wards, there was a crack of displaced air, and Griphook stood in the chamber, sword drawn, obsidian eyes blazing. The goblin took in the scene in one sweep: the destroyed chamber, the cracked mirror, the unconscious professor, Harry kneeling on the floor with gold light still fading from his skin. "You activated the debt's defensive protocols," Griphook said. "I activated something. I'm not sure I'd call it a protocol, it felt more like an immune response." It was. The debt of gold includes protections against existential threats to the holder. Parasitic soul magic qualifies. Griphook sheathed his sword and knelt beside Quirrell. His long fingers pressed against the man's temples, and something passed between them, a pulse of goblin magic, diagnostic, precise. "He'll live. Damaged but alive. The soul fragment is gone. Gone. Not destroyed, it fled. Voldemort's still out there." He mentioned Horcruxes. "Yes." Griphook went very still. His face, always sharp, always guarded, became something carved from stone. "That changes things." "I know. We will discuss this later." "Not here." Griphook looked at Harry properly for the first time, and something moved behind those obsidian eyes, something that, in a less disciplined face, might have been fear, or pride, or the complicated love of someone who had spent 6 years raising a child they never expected to care about. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "Your scar is bleeding." Harry touched his forehead. His fingers came away red. "It doesn't hurt. That is not the same as being fine." Griphook pulled a cloth from inside his jacket and pressed it to Harry's forehead with a gentleness that seemed to surprise both of them. "You fought the Dark Lord alone at 11. You are the most recklessly courageous person I have ever known, and I have known goblin warriors who charged dragons for sport. Is that a compliment?" "It is a statement of fact delivered with enormous personal frustration." Griphook pulled the cloth away and inspected the cut. "The stone. Do you have it?" Harry reached into his pocket and held up the Philosopher's Stone. It sat in his palm, blood-red, warm, pulsing with a quiet power that had nothing to do with goblin craft or wizard magic. It was its own thing, alchemical, ancient, the product of a mind that had found a way to turn lead into gold and death into life. "Flammels," Harry said. "It should be returned to him." "Agreed. I'll write to Dumbledore." Dumbledore, who conveniently left the castle on the night his trap was sprung. Dumbledore, who trusted me enough to leave the castle on the night his trap was sprung. Harry looked at the cracked mirror, the destroyed pillars, the scorch marks on the floor. He knew I'd come down here. He knew I'd face Quirrell. He set this up as a test, not of my power, but of my character. Would I take the stone for myself? Would I bargain with Voldemort? Would I use the debt of gold as a weapon of mass destruction? And you? I fought. I refused. And I'm returning the stone. Harry pocketed it again. Dumbledore's still a manipulative old man who plays chess with people's lives. But he's also the only wizard alive who understands Voldemort well enough to help me fight him. I don't have to like his methods to recognize his value. That is the most goblin thing you have ever said. I learned from the best." They looked at each other across the ruined chamber, the goblin and the boy, and the 6 years of history between them hummed with a resonance that went deeper than the debt of gold. "Take me to the hospital wing," Harry said. "My friends are waiting." Ron was awake. He was sitting up in a hospital bed with a bandage around his head and a thunderous expression that melted into relief the instant Harry walked through the infirmary door. "You're alive," Ron said. "Hermione told me you went on alone and I've been losing my mind for, how long has it been?" "About 2 hours. 2 hours of thinking you were dead. I've aged 30 years. I'm basically an old man now." Harry sat on the edge of Ron's bed. Hermione was in a chair beside it, red-eyed, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, and the moment she saw Harry she launched herself at him in a hug that nearly knocked him off the mattress. "You promised," she said into his shoulder. You promised you'd come back. I did come back. You're bleeding from the forehead. Minor detail. Griphook stood in the infirmary doorway, watching. Madame Pomfrey bustled past him with the professional indifference of a healer who had seen everything and was not going to be impressed by a goblin warrior in her workspace. Sit down, Mr. Potter. Let me see that scar. And you, she pointed at Griphook, if you're going to lurk, at least close the door. There's a draft. Griphook closed the door. He did not stop lurking. Harry sat and let Pomfrey clean the cut on his forehead and pour something foul-tasting down his throat that made the residual headache from the Voldemort encounter dissolve like mist. Then he told Ron and Hermione everything, the mirror, Quirrell, Voldemort's face, the Wraith, the Death's defensive eruption, the Horcruxes. Ron listened with growing horror. Hermione listened with growing determination. Horcruxes, she said when he finished. Soul containers. I've read references, dark magic, the darkest, fragments of the soul anchored to physical objects to prevent true death. He split himself into pieces, Harry confirmed. Multiple pieces, based on the way he said it. Which means destroying his body isn't enough. We'd have to find every fragment and destroy them all. Ron said. Harry looked at him. You don't have to. I played chess against an enchanted stone army tonight and got clobbered by a 30-foot queen so that you could face the darkest wizard in history alone. We are past the point of, you don't have to. We're in. Hermione. Obviously, Hermione said. Something in Harry's chest, not the gold sense, not magic, something entirely human, expanded until it pressed against his ribs and made his eyes sting. He'd been the Gold Tongue for 6 years. He'd been powerful, protected, surrounded by goblins who respected his authority. But he had never, until this moment, fully understood what it meant to have people who chose to stand with you not because of what you could do for them, but because of who you were. Thank you, he said. It was inadequate. It was everything. The door opened. Dumbledore stood in the doorway, still in his traveling cloak, snow melting on his shoulders. His face was drawn, and behind the half-moon spectacles, his blue eyes were bright with something that looked remarkably like tears. I came as fast as I could, he said. The ministry session was a fake, Harry said. Quirrell arranged it. Or Voldemort did. Dumbledore nodded slowly. He looked at Harry, at Ron's bandaged head, at Hermione's red eyes, at Griphook standing sentinel by the wall. He looked at the blood on Harry's forehead and the golden light still faintly visible in his skin. I owe you an explanation, Dumbledore said. You owe me several. But they can wait until morning. Harry reached into his pocket and held out the Philosopher's Stone. This belongs to Nicholas Flamel. I'd like you to return it to him, along with a strongly worded suggestion that he find a better hiding place. Dumbledore took the stone. His fingers closed around it gently, reverently, and for a moment his composure cracked and what showed beneath was not the headmaster, not the chief warlock, not the leader of the Order of the Phoenix, but an old man carrying too many burdens who had just been told that the child he'd failed had saved the day without him. I am proud of you, Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry met his eyes. Don't be proud. Be better. The words hung in the air between them. Dumbledore held Harry's gaze for a long moment, and then he nodded, once, deeply, and left the infirmary with the stone in his hand and the weight of a promise on his shoulders. The end of the year came quickly. Exams passed in a blur that Harry navigated with the strange serenity of someone who had faced Voldemort and found everything else manageable by comparison. He aced Transfiguration and Charms. He made Flitwick gasp with a levitation charm that combined wand magic and goblin craft to lift the entire classroom an inch off the floor. He handed in a potions exam that Snape marked with a grudging E, which Ron insisted was basically a declaration of love in Snape's emotional vocabulary. The House Cup went to Gryffindor, bolstered by a last-minute points award from Dumbledore that Harry suspected was as much apology as recognition. Neville earned 10 points for outstanding moral courage, which made the boy go crimson and nearly fall off his bench with pride. The feast was magnificent. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and ate roast beef and laughed at Fred and George's increasingly elaborate toasts and felt the gold singing in the plates beneath his hands and the walls around him and the vaults far below London where the accumulated wealth of the wizarding world hummed in its sleep. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy raised his goblet an inch in Harry's direction. A small gesture. A beginning. Harry raised his own goblet in return. The next morning, the castle emptied. Students poured toward the Hogwarts Express, trunks dragging, owls hooting, promises to write shouted across the platform. Harry walked through the chaos with Hedwig on his shoulder and his trunk in his hand and felt the school pulling at him, every goblin-forged element in Hogwarts reaching for him, reluctant to let go. Same time next year. Ron said at the train compartment door. Wouldn't miss it. Write to me. Both of you. Hermione, I expect at least one letter that isn't a bibliography. No promises, Hermione said, and hugged him, and hugged Harry, and disappeared into the compartment with her nose already in a book. Harry boarded the train. The express pulled away from Hogsmeade Station, and Hogwarts receded behind them, towers and turrets and ancient stone, growing smaller in the window until it was a dot on the horizon and then nothing at all. He rode in comfortable silence with his friends, watching the Scottish countryside roll past, feeling the gold in the rails beneath the wheels and the coins in 100 students' pockets and the vast, singing network that connected him to every corner of a world that was strange and beautiful and deeply, stubbornly resistant to change. At King's Cross, he said his goodbyes. Ron's family collected him in a cheerful red-headed swarm that included a mother who looked at Harry with kind eyes and said, "You're too thin, dear," which was apparently a Weasley greeting. Hermione's parents were dentists who seemed mildly stunned by the entire experience of having a magical child but handled it with the calm British determination to be polite about everything, even the impossible. Harry walked through the barrier into the Muggle world. Griphook was waiting, leaning against a pillar, wearing a dark suit and looking exactly like what he was, someone who had been waiting a long time and was very irritated about it. "How was school?" Griphook asked. "I fought Voldemort, made 3 friends, got someone's father to withdraw a petition to expel me, and learned how to forge metal with a wand. So a quiet year." "Very quiet." They walked through the station together, the goblin and the boy, drawing stares from Muggles who couldn't quite figure out why the short man in the suit looked so sharp in every sense of the word. "The Dursleys?" Harry asked. "Are in Majorca. They'll be back next week. The house is empty." Griphook paused. "I've made certain improvements to your room in their absence. Nothing dramatic. Just goblin standard living quarters. You renovated my bedroom. I upgraded your cupboard into a pocket dimension of approximately 400 square feet with running water, a forge, and a training area. The exterior remains unchanged. The Dursleys will never know." Harry stopped walking. He looked at Griphook, at the sharp face and the obsidian eyes and the jaw that was always clenched against the vulnerability of caring about something, and felt a rush of affection so intense it was almost physical. "Thank you, Griphook. Don't thank me. I'm protecting an investment." "Right. An investment I am moderately attached to." "Moderately? Don't push it." They stepped out of King's Cross into the London afternoon. The sun was shining. The city hummed with life, Muggle and magical, mundane and extraordinary, the visible world and the hidden one overlapping in ways that most people never noticed. Harry felt the gold beneath his feet. The veins of goblin craft that ran through the city like a circulatory system, in the foundations of Gringotts, in the hidden passages between worlds, in the coins and artifacts and ancient forged things that connected the magical world to the physical one. All of it singing. All of it his. But the gold wasn't what mattered. Not really. What mattered was the letter from Ron already in his pocket, written on the train, shoved into his hand at the last second, reading, "This was the best year of my life. See you in September, mate." What mattered was Hermione's promise to research Horcruxes over the summer. What mattered was Draco's cautious nod and Neville's quiet courage and McGonagall's grudging approval and Dumbledore's promise to do better and Snape's complicated, unresolved grief. What mattered was the ring on the chain around his neck, the first thing he'd ever made, warm against his skin. And what mattered was the memory of a dying goblin in an alley who had looked at a frightened child and seen, not a weapon, not a commodity, not a means to an end, but a person worth giving everything to. Harry reached into his pocket and pulled out the last thing he'd received before leaving Hogwarts. An envelope, plain and unsigned, that had been waiting on his pillow that morning. Inside was a single coin. It was goblin-made, he could feel that immediately. But it was old. Older than Gringotts. Older than Hogwarts. Older than anything in his experience, the gold sent straining to read it and finding depths it couldn't reach.